It's my pleasure to welcome you all here this morning to Building Climate Action Locally, Tools from the CCAT project. My name is Karen Foley. I'm one of the principal investigators in this project, and my co-principal investigator, Philip Crowe, he will speak to us at the end of this morning's session and wrap up the proceedings. So this event, it's the closure event of the CCAT project, and it's our intention to share with you what we've done during the last 2 years of this pilot project. We are also going to provide links and contact details for those among you that might want to explore further some of the tools and techniques that we have been working with. Now, for those of you not familiar with this CCAT project, CCAT, nothing to do with felines, but CCAT stands for Coastal Communities Adapting Together. And it's a 1.29 million euro pilot project funded under the Ireland-Wales Cooperation Programme under Priority Access 2, which is adaptation of the Irish Sea and coastal communities to climate change. And the research that we've been doing over the last 2 years was undertaken or aimed to contribute to coastal community engagement by developing, demonstrating and testing a suite of digital and interactive tools that would increase what we call adaptive capacity. And in doing so, the intention is to build community resilience and to increase awareness of climate change impacts and coastal management, and also to realise the potential of the Irish Sea region. So a lot of details of what we've done over the last 2 years you'll find on the webpage, which is ccatprojects.eu. As I say, you always have to remember it's C with cat afterwards, otherwise you get a lot of cats. And we also have a YouTube channel called CCAT Coastal Communities Adapting Together. What CCAT is we are a consortium of 6 partners, 3 from Wales and 3 from Ireland, and they'll be introduced to you a little later on. And just to say that projects like this, they start with an idea, an ambition to secure funding, but once underway, they very much take on a personality and a life of their own once they're invigorated by the appointment of the research team that came together. So a team of 8 full-time researchers came together on this project, along with other staff in the partner organizations. And just to say, from my point of view, the team have been absolutely amazing and a privilege and a pleasure to work with. So the 24 months of this project, it has sped past despite the upheaval of COVID, and I think we'll talk more about that later because that did give a little bit of a flavour to, at least it certainly influenced the sort of shift, and more of the work was online than perhaps we initially anticipated at the start. So how this morning is going to work, the research team, each member will talk about the tools they developed or adapted for a specific community. There should be a time for a short Q&A at the end of each speaker, but I'll also draw your attention specifically to the Q&A box at the tab or in the bar at the bottom of the screen. And if you can type your questions in there, if the speakers don't get time to address them at the end, if there's not time for that, they will write back into the box later on. And we'll also ensure that the links to the tools will be shared at the end of the session, and everybody who's registered, we'll contact them afterwards with the links. So you should have the ability to catch up or to find out more if you're interested. Before we go on, Pauline, I'll go to you, sort of go into the details of the project. We just have a infographic overview of our activities in terms of numbers. We switch to Pauline's screen to show that. Thank you, Pauline. So there's just some of our metrics from the CCAT project. As I say, we were a small project, 2 years, 6 partners, 8 people employed full-time with a lot of support from others in their partner organizations. So you've got figures there under the operational activity and the activities and the social media. Far too much to go into in detail here. And of course, they all represent different levels of engagement. So some of the figures you may take with a slight pinch of salt. What does it mean if 10,000 people engage with a web page? But we have other specifics that nearly 500 people attended 2 of our online community knowledge exchange events. We had 950 people involved in a co-creation project of tree planting. So there's a lot of material there to go into in a little more detail and may be referred to a little bit further on. So while we're just talking about that, I would like to find out a little bit more about who we have here. So we have a small little survey. The survey link is at the bottom. If people look at the bottom, they'll see a survey link. If people would like to click on that, but Chiara, I don't know if you say anything a little bit about the survey, but we just want to find out who has signed up for this, where you're distributed, whether we're reaching out to academics, to practitioners. So if you type on that link, you'll see a little survey like that, and it invites you. Chiara, would you like to talk about what it invites you to do?
Yeah,
Chiara is one of our research scientists working on the project.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, it should just take a few seconds, sorry. And so the first question is about where are you based? So you have a map where if you double click, basically you zoom in the map, or you can also use the buttons on the top left of the map to zoom in. So double click, zoom in, and one click, pin the point. So once you're happy with the points, you obviously don't need to be accurate on your location. You move to the next two questions, which are what type of organization do you work with? And this is one single choice question. And then on how to identify, how do you identify yourself? So I'm going to also complete the survey. And then once you're happy, you click on submit.
And we'll come back to this a little later on to see who we actually have there. So as Chiara said, if you look at the chat box at the bottom, you'll see the link. If you press on that, you'll take you to the survey. One thing about these closure events, it gives us all a chance to reflect a little bit on progress personally as well. And one of the things I learned during this project, something I sort of knew before, but I now know the importance of multiple communication methods for this sort of community engagement work. As I say, I was aware of it, but now I know how crucial it is, particularly when engaging with younger members of the community, coastal communities or whatever. So we're just going to go briefly live to somebody we've engaged for this morning's event. Caroline Chappell is a graphic artist who's going to be working in the background this morning to create some sort of graphic recording of this, for us, very significant event. So she's going to be turning our ideas, our discussions, some of your questions into a meaningful image that we'll share at the end. So we'll return back to Caroline a little later on. So you're very welcome. It's great to have you there. Okay, one final thing before we really kick off the proceedings, and I'll be introducing a member of our advisory board, Vicky Brown, is to say that we were honoured to receive, the CCAT research team, we were honoured to receive a message from the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, marking our closure event. We've put his letter in its entirety up on the website, but I'm just going to briefly read some of the highlights from his letter to give a flavour of his message to us. So this is a message from President Higgins. May I send my very best wishes to all of those participating in this important conference organised by University College Dublin to showcase the work of the Coastal Communities Adapting Together project. Your project, funded by EU Interreg, is a crucial one, not just because of its international scope, which enables research teams from Ireland and Wales to collaborate together, but critically because of the topic your research aims to address. There is scarcely anybody who has not acknowledged that climate change is the greatest existential crisis we face, one for which the time to act is closing with worryingly fast consequences. Knowledge is one of the greatest tools we have in the battle against climate change, and your project focuses on improving community awareness and understanding of climate impacts through enhanced observation, has results to demonstrate that it has enabled those local communities within the project scope to engage directly with local policymakers, and has facilitated community resilience in the face of increasing coastal change. It's up to each and every one of us as global citizens of this shared vulnerable planet to face up to the challenge of climate change. It is, I suggest, a first order moral responsibility that requires all of us to make significant changes, not just in terms of how we balance our lives and our economic activities. So may I conclude by congratulating again all of those involved in this important scholarly work and those who are putting into practice what so many of us feel. The intergenerational nature of your work brings the possibility of ever deeper collaboration between activists on justice, human rights, and ecological responsibility. something I so welcome. So Michael D. Higgins hooked her on the heron. So with follow that, Vicky. So now, as well as a great research team that we had put together, we were very, very fortunate in the advisory team. We put together a stellar advisory board to guide our work. Their role was to keep us grounded and to provide oversight. And one of their members is going to speak to us for a few minutes. Vicky Brown is the CEO of Rewrite Climate Education and Cool Planet Experience. Vicky has been working to address social issues for most of her career, specifically engaging young people with conversations around the climate crisis. So Vicky, over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Good morning to everybody here. I can't believe there's 80 of you out there, and it's wonderful to see such interest in this particular research project. Firstly, congratulations to everyone involved in the project. I think what you've achieved is nothing short of spectacular, especially given the context of the last 20 months, which have been very, very challenging, and specifically very challenging when you're talking about engagement and trying to engage young people in this conversation. If we look back to the time when I first met with Karen and Philip, and they were talking about this project, back then, climate was certainly something that people were talking about, but the engagement was at a very different level. Certainly, it was something that was discussed maybe in the media, but it wasn't something that felt very mainstream. Whereas I think that landscape has changed dramatically, especially in the last 24 months or so. And I think that's really, that is amazing. And that really struck me because when we set up Cool Planet Experience, one of the challenges we had was trying to bring the conversation down to a very normal level so that people would engage with it, young people would discuss it, and it wouldn't feel something outside the scope of something you could just talk about. Like if you weren't a scientist, that you could still talk about climate and why it affected you and why you're concerned about it. And I think we're definitely moving into that space now. And one thing struck me, I was just saying to the others on a call the other day, was I was listening to the radio and I heard two of the news presenters having a very informed discussion and conversation with each other. So they didn't have any expert on around the role of the national herd and how that fitted into the whole climate conversation and the discussion around community and how to engage. So I thought that was really, something quite a shift that's happened in those last 3 years or so. And I think this work is incredibly valuable in that conversation because there's still a lot to be done. There was a report during the summer from Education International around climate education specifically, and countries signing up to their commitments around education. And I think they gave the report a failure overall, because, and some of the key points that jumped out to me there in that report was, the top 20 emitters, sort of were failing around their quality of climate education that they were giving. And that's still concerning, and that's something we need to really address. And the ones that were doing well were the ones that were often the most affected. So that sort of falls into that whole climate justice piece. And certainly there is a big need around educating girls, and girls who are most likely to be living in that areas that will be affected by climate as well. And finally, teachers, because I do a lot of work with teachers, and it's ensuring that you equip them so that they can create the next inspired, hopeful generation of young people and young thinkers. And what I love particularly about the project that you guys have just finished now, or the research you've just finished now, is you really met people where they're at, and you used your tools specifically around the digital interactions to the best possible way that you could have. And I think certainly for my generation, I'm a digital adapter, so I still kind of jump between on and offline, and I don't feel that those two things necessarily sit very well together sometimes. But certainly when you're talking about young people and climate education, this world is seamless for them. And I think it's been really interesting to see some of the work that you've done there. So I think there's huge value, and it's really important that we take what we've learned here and continue to move this conversation forward and this engagement forward. So congratulations, everybody. And we look forward to a nice, interesting morning hearing all the success of the project.
Vicky, thank you very much indeed. And now I was planning to go back to Chiara if we have some results in from the poll about who we have attending. I know Chiara's put a link at the bottom. Maybe it's, we have some people indeed. So 69 people have responded. Anyone, should we go to that? Do you want to talk about the results there, Chiara? It's showing us. where people are
Yes.
located. So both I'll let you talk.
Yeah, obviously, most of people are located between Ireland and UK, but it's interesting to see that someone is following us from Italy. I'm proud of it. And if I zoom out, I can see someone from India, which may be possible, and someone from the middle of the Indian Ocean, which I think it's a mistake. It's definitely an outlier. And interestingly, we have more than the 40% from public authorities. And the rest 30% from academic institution staff and few students, unfortunately, and a kind of a 9% of practitioners. And also here some interesting results on the part of the demographics. So female are the more popular group here, and so we are kind of 58 female and 42 male. And I think we were commenting these that climate change topics are generally more kind of followed by female. Did we, Karen? I think we remember.
I think, yes, we had one colleague who was interested in the gendered nature of those involved with climate change. So I think this result is interesting and maybe confirms it slightly, but it's great to see that there. It's also great to see so many public authority and practitioners there, because we're obviously reaching out for them. The other thing to say is that this session is being recorded, so even if some of the students are not online, they may well be able to engage with the little later on. So thank you everybody for participating in that, and thank you Chiara for organising it. We're going to start then with talking about the tools, and the first talk we're going to have is from Saul Crowley, who is a research scientist with Fingal County Council, and he's going to talk about tools for engaging with local authorities, specifically a tool called geodesign and community engagement. So Saul, over to you.
Great, thanks Karen. I'll just share my screen now, hopefully you can see. So give me a thumbs up or confirm I'm not shouting into the void.
Yeah, we can see that. Brilliant. Thanks, Saul.
Good. Yeah, so thanks, Karen, and thanks for everyone who's joining us this morning. As Karen mentioned, my name is Saul Crowley. I was a research scientist with Fingal County Council for the project. And what I'm going to be talking about this morning is specifically the tools we developed that were more geared towards local authorities that maybe help with them for engaging citizens with these kinds of topics. And what we're going to be speaking about in particular is one of our kind of approaches called geodesign. It's a term that might be very familiar to some, but it might be completely foreign to others. So I'm going to do a very, very brief and simplified explanation of what it is. So on the project, we were interested in developing and kind of testing new methods to kind of increase understanding of climate-related issues, and also build capacity in our coastal communities to kind of help with citizen engagement and kind of help them understand and learn how to adapt to these kinds of changes. So geodesign was kind of a major tool for doing this. It's a very novel approach in Ireland. It's been used with varying levels of kind of frequency, I suppose, internationally. It's used a lot in the US if you look it up later on. But essentially, geodesign, it's a participatory design method that's meant to be kind of a combination of kind of negotiation, planning, and also kind of spatial mapping, and it all comes together to create essentially a hybrid kind of workshop model that enables kind of varying stakeholders with kind of varying priorities or kind of conflicting priorities to come together and really kind of come to a conclusion that's productive for everybody involved. So simply put, I have a very simple kind of overview here. It's a method and tool for quickly making effective decisions about complex and competing issues. So that's the important thing to remember. With Fingal County Council, we were interested in particular in addressing a number of challenges that were being faced. So there's issues with kind of like local development plans and how are they being brought up to communities, kind of challenges around certain communities maybe resisting to kind of bigger levels of change that were required of them. Maybe certain communities that were kind of maybe overly reliant on local government to find solutions to issues, or issues in general that were surrounding kind of the ability for a local authority to engage a diversity of stakeholders when they're going into these kinds of activities for consultation. So geodesign was the kind of best response to these kinds of issues because it's inherently participatory. It inherently brings together a variety of people, and above all else, it's kind of meant to tackle these very complex issues. where you have very, very kind of fraught topics that people might have very, very like contrasting views of. And geodesign is meant to be a way for them to meet in the middle. So our project focus area for this was an area called the Rogerstown Estuary. Again, some of you might know exactly where this is, some of you might not. So I'll just zoom out very quickly. This is the specific area we're working on here. If I zoom out a bit further, you can see where it's located in Ireland, just north of Dublin, Fingal County Council, and that's roughly where we're working in general. So CCAT, we developed the geodesign project specifically with kind of planning staff in the council. It can be quite a complex tool for the average citizen to work with, so we decided to pitch it initially at the kind of maybe more literate in these kinds of topics. Staff are more literate in these kinds of topics. I wanted to kind of develop it as kind of a key community stakeholders as well. And so like I said, workshops focused around that specific area. And it's important to note, I suppose, that under general guidelines from the Irish government under the Climate Action Plan, all public sector bodies are required to kind of start moving now towards making significant reductions in carbon usage, in addition to kind of ensuring that adaptation measures to climate impacts are being more foregrounded in how they actually work. In particular for Ireland, that's things like coasting and flooding and coastal erosion. So Fingal as a local authority was kind of a key stakeholder in all this. The county itself is going through rapid periods of growth. The population is almost doubled in the last few decades. It being just north of Dublin City, it's obviously a big kind of area for the commuter belt, and itself is developing as well as a hub. So there's lots of pressures being kind of put upon the existing infrastructure and the existing communities that are there right now. So this is all coming together to create a situation where there's an opportunity for us to step in and work with the council to kind of innovate, I suppose, new methods for kind of helping them address these kind of newer problems. So we're particularly interested in looking at these kinds of things that relate to kind of, I suppose, climate action broadly, and then kind of flooding and kind of local area kind of ways that kind of climate action is reflected. So things like energy efficiency, flood risk management, infrastructure, transport, and then very broadly kind of like nature-based solutions and housing and things like that. Overall, our process kind of tried to engage multiple stakeholders. It wasn't just planning staff within the council themselves. It was a variety of kind of community representatives, local elected officials, and kind of like professionals who are involved in this kind of wider process for how the council works. And generally, this kind of thing falls under the responsibility of all local authorities anyway. It's their responsibility to kind of engage as many stakeholders as possible in how they kind of develop infrastructure anyway, especially in moving forward as now they're trying to make it more climate resilient. And one of the main things we were interested in the project was to find a way to maybe bring in people who don't necessarily engage with this stuff anyway for a variety of reasons, people who maybe feel like their voice isn't necessarily heard in the process if they do want to engage, or people who maybe feel like they don't know enough in order to actually take part. So geodesign was a way to kind of really bring all this stuff together and help them work quickly towards these kind of solutions. We split the study, our project, into two areas. I won't go into high level detail now because the outputs are still kind of being worked upon internally by the council, but broadly speaking, one is Rogerstown Park, which is a kind of an absolutely huge new kind of public amenity that was developed by the council. It was a former landfill site. Now it's been turned over into a public park. It's been reclaimed. So we worked with planning staff, consultants that were hired by the council, local resident kind of representatives, and also local councillors. And they all worked together to kind of really shape what that park will be and the local kind of infrastructure that will be there to kind of enhance accessibility and things like that for the park. The group specifically looked at kind of ways for developing outdoor facilities, things like beekeeping and cycle routes and playgrounds were kind of big ones. Animal grazing, solar panels also came up. But it was just about kind of enhancing it, and we got a really, really good kind of output from that. There's lots of ideas that were progressed, I think, from that, and lots of very kind of actionable like additions, I think, are going to come from that too in the coming years. The other area we looked at for the project was an area around called Donabate, near a new piece of major infrastructure called St. Jesus Hospital. And in that setting, it was Fingal County Council and another major kind of stakeholder for them, which is the Health Service Executive, HSE in Ireland. Because St. Eta's Hospital, it's an 18th century hospital building. It's now being turned over for use as part of the national forensic mental health service hospital. So it's going to be a major shift in how the land is used. It's going to be a major shift in how people use the area, people coming there to work, people coming there to actually use the site. And with that, it brings a lot of other kind of questions of how the area will progress. So our project in that area was really focused on finding ways to kind of, I suppose, enhance the surrounding area, or enhance access, and find ways to address those kind of forthcoming issues around transport and stuff like that. So in that sense, it was very much like planners and kind of responsible people from HSC collaborating to find ways to kind of develop stuff like coastal walkway routes, biodiversity initiatives like wildflower meadows, things to enhance the natural grounds, and also stuff like local amenities like playgrounds, bus stops, bus routes, stuff like that. And that's the more, I suppose, for urban planners, that could be more of an interesting one, because that's very, very much grounded in kind of precipitating the kind of need that comes with major progressions for infrastructure in local communities. And that is another one that's currently being worked on internally by the council. So hopefully we will see something that comes from that very soon. But most interestingly for us, for the project, as a result of COVID-19, everything had to go online. As Karen mentioned, we had to do a kind of a very sudden heel turn towards online activities. And as you'll see from the kind of collage I have here, you see the now iconic black background grid layout of an online meeting like Teams or Zoom. And the interesting thing for the geodesign workshop was that all of our workshops, all of our actual, I suppose, activities, initiatives were all done online. And it was all done over Teams or Zoom meetings. All of these tools are digital, so inherently they work in these kind of online settings. So we were developing this project, I suppose, very early on in CCAT's life, but it only really kind of came to fruition during COVID-19. So in addition to kind of being, I suppose, a new tool for the council, it also presented a new kind of way for them to develop a digital offering in how they actually work towards kind of planning and consultation. So when we were working on this, Fingal County Council moving into a period of local area planning anyway. So this represented a shift from the traditional kind of approach that would be taken by every local authority really how to do this, where you'd have kind of a town hall style in-person meeting where you rent out a very large venue, everyone comes in and sits down and they get presentations and they're kind of asked to speak. Instead, this is a bit more targeted and focused. We invited specific representatives from community groups, local elected officials and people who are responsible for certain areas within the council to attend these online meetings. And together they were all collaborating using a number of kind of online and digital tools that we were availing of. And one of those, you can see here the white background and the grids and the maps. That's using a particular piece of software that we were kind of commissioned from a company called Geodesign Hub. And their speciality is in geodesign, but specifically doing it online, using a kind of an online web platform. So obviously this is a very timely focus for us in the project, but in general, as a digital tool for citizen engagement, I think it's a quite interesting way for accessing kind of underrepresented audiences, for maybe kind of enhancing people's ability to even engage with stuff in the first place, because it makes these kind of issues that are very spatially focused, like roads and kind of zoning, things like that, way more apparent because they can see it kind of in a map. They can move around the map, they can change the view. You know, they can do satellite, they can do different kinds of maps. So it makes it a bit more intuitive for people. But I suppose one of the main points for us with using this approach, like geodesign as an approach, all of these workshops, all of the work that went into this, all the submissions, all the kind of, I suppose, the activities themselves, in total, it took maybe 3 to 4 hours between the beginning, maybe an introductory session, whereas a short meeting, and then a proper workshop that was online. That only took maybe like less than half of the day. And for that to come about, that's a kind of a good signifier of how useful geodesign can be for these very complicated, very nuanced topics with lots of competing, I suppose, focuses for different participants. All these groups work together, and by the end of their workshop, they had a fully formed kind of plan for a local area. Like this is an example that we did with students in the middle picture here. That was for Port Ryan Peninsula itself, but there are dozens of submissions for individuals. It adds up to maybe in larger ones, it can be hundreds of submissions. But overall, it enables people to kind of get everything out that they're thinking about, everything that they maybe want to prioritize. And then from there on, it's a kind of an enhanced kind of negotiation process. You can prioritize what it is that they want to see above others. So what we found from the workshops, what we found from our initial kind of feedback from it, beyond what the council themselves do and what we can say for local authorities in general, is that there's significant potential in using geodesign as like an innovative community and stakeholder engagement tool. For local development in particular, it's something that is really good, I think, because it lets kind of the most important stakeholders, which are obviously the local communities, the elected officials, people like that, it allows them to really come to the table and present everything that it is that they want to see. And even though those things might not necessarily align with other decision makers that are involved in that process, it still kind of facilitates a better level of dialogue, I suppose, over what those priorities might be, what the kind of likelihood of those coming together might be, and it actually lets everyone really take part in that negotiation process. But I think on the flip side of that, there is a greater need for understanding, I suppose, of policymakers and how they kind of view this as a tool. Because at the same time, communities need to be motivated to participate in this kind of stuff. I suppose plenty of people who might do this professionally will know that a lot of the time you get only a certain subset of the community. That's just a fraction of the whole. A lot of the time it's maybe the more motivated people who have their own kind of priorities that don't really represent the rest. Maybe people in general just feel like they aren't involved, they aren't interested. But as a result, anyway, to successfully engage these kinds of stakeholders and involve new stakeholders and communities, there's a requirement, I suppose, to build a broader kind of understanding of this as a digital tool, and also the kind of opportunity that it presents within a local authority on a kind of a higher level for how things are done with professional staff. So I think one of the biggest things that kind of we're saying would help with this is kind of further research into looking at attitudes of policymakers and kind of attitudes at a community level for what they think they could do, and maybe kind of finding out what their needs would be on a very immediate level to make them motivated to take part in this kind of stuff. But broadly speaking, we've been able to come up with kind of a very kind of big list of the overall benefits and challenges. The challenges I mentioned, right, is kind of a learning curve of this stuff. Communities may not feel the need. They may feel they need training to take part in this fully. Sometimes it could be a very complex topic. They might not know really a lot about, let's just say, nature-based solutions for flooding and things like that. But there's processes that you can engage with that help people learn. Things like this as well. We're not necessarily saying that this is a 100% replacement for in-person activities. It never will be. The kind of spontaneous interactions you get when you're actually in a room with people doesn't happen online, as we all know by now. So that is lost in that process with this, I suppose, too. We're naturally social creatures as humans, so we need to be able to see people in person all the time to be able to resolve maybe more complicated or heated things. But on another level, I suppose, geodesign requires support from policymakers, like I said. So even if the impetus is there to kind of engage people with this as a tool, there still needs to be a follow through from a policy level for implementing what these suggestions might be or what comes of the project. But overall, I think the benefits do outweigh the challenges. It's an incredibly kind of good tool for engaging people who may be more lay when they come to this in comparison to practitioners, let's just say. It's incredibly good for engaging with kind of visual and spatial aspects of planning. It really simplifies a lot of the kind of more nuanced issues that come in with surrounding planning. Another point here is it encourages and facilitates interdepartmental collaboration. I know that kind of some of the feedback we've gotten already from people internal to the council, it was saying that it really got people out of their silos. It allowed them to work together a lot more cohesively. I think people who work in completely different departments and in completely different parts of the building who wouldn't necessarily know of each other personally or professionally, it brought them together in a very quick way, and it allowed them to really kind of just do their jobs quickly and easily together. And like I said, it quickly and efficiently brought people together. I think importantly too, it's a way to engage a wider subset of people in the planning process. As a digital tool, all it really requires from participants is a computer and an internet connection. So in theory, anybody can do that. And the barriers for people to be able to access that are a lot lower, let's just say, than in other kind of means, like if there's like a town hall style thing. Whereas in comparison, this is people can join straight away. And again, it's an online platform for opening up ways that are kind of, I suppose, a lot more innovative than a traditional, let's just say, written plan that people then have to digest themselves at home, read over, understand, and then submit, let's just say, a comment to the council. Then have to digest it themselves, and they come up with a response. this is a way, I suppose, of getting in ahead of that process to mitigate any future issues that might come up at a very high level with other communities. So for the future, we have developed a geodesign compendium that's kind of looking at what we say is like the best practice or the kind of case studies that are for what's happening internationally with geodesign. And we want this to be kind of one of the big legacies of the project, I suppose. We want people to be able to see, if they're interested, I suppose, in using geodesign, we want them to see that what other people are doing, maybe at a more mature level with geodesign as a tool. There's a huge number of international examples right now that are very high quality. The compendium probably takes the best of those, and it has resources that have been developed at an international level for using geodesign and kind of how it can successfully be done in a variety of kind of contexts. But what we were specifically interested in was coastal climate adaptation. So in a way, what we want as a big legacy of this is this to be a kind of a proof of concept for our work in Rogerstown and also in general for people who might be interested in the future. So that's kind of geodesign as a tool. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any questions, more than happy to hear them now, but we can also be in the chat for the rest of the talk too. Thanks.
Saul, thank you for that. One thing I didn't do during my introduction was identify who the 6 partners were. Fingal County Council was one. On the Irish side, the 3 were Fingal County Council, UCD, and UCC, specifically MaREI, the coastal research area there. In Wales, we have University of Cardiff, we've got the Port of Milford Haven, and we have Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum. Just one thing to say, we've been working with technology, and you very often doubt technology. And when we were looking at the survey, Chiara said, oh, that must be a mistake when there was a little pin in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but we've had a message on the chat line saying, not a mistake, there's somebody there from the Seychelles. So I think Silvano is the name, so you're very welcome indeed. We have 2 questions for Saul. The first one, I'll take the one that came through in the Q&A first of all. That was from Robert Devoy. Accepting the value of online meetings for communities, do you still value for meeting with people in and on the reality of the coast as coastal workshops and discussions? Need for design in linking the 2 approaches. So that's really, yeah, I suppose the online, the offline, and where we go from here.
Yeah, no, I think so. And anyone you ask who's involved from the council who's been doing this, there are people professionally in the council who've been doing this for years. Who are, they say they were impressed with geodesign anyway. A lot of them are happy with how it turns out, but they will even tell you themselves that this is still something that isn't a replacement for how things are traditionally done. I think at the very beginning of the project, we had very grand plans for doing like a hybrid version of this. We wanted to have things like information sessions, like pop-up stalls, pretty much along the beach in our kind of target area, to kind of get people, I suppose, get them involved in, I suppose, the broader level what's happening. But I think on a fundamental level, it is something that is meant to be a hybrid, I'd say. People need to be in a room working together all the time for this stuff. I think I mentioned, I suppose, in the presentation too, but it is like people need to be able to spontaneously speak to each other over a small, like a 1-minute discussion between 2 people. Doesn't really happen in a meeting with 30 other participants. And things like that do need to occur. Especially for simple stuff, like if there's something somebody doesn't understand, it's a bigger, I suppose for me anyway, it feels like more of a bigger deal to ask about something that's a very small topic in a kind of a group session than it would be if it was an in-person thing. But yeah, no, I think and our kind of experience of it showed that even though the right people, I suppose, were in the room for all this stuff, when geodesign itself is done traditionally, it's in a big room with more participants. So it is better, I suppose, to have more people involved in the process.
Thank you, Saul. And the next 2 questions are sort of linked. We have Orla Kelly and Mary Ann Harris. Orla asking, is it difficult for lay people to use? Is it expensive? And Kevin has put Kevin Halpenny of Fingal County Council has put an endorsement in there. But Mary Ann Harris has asked, does Saul think local authorities in Ireland are equipped with staff expertise for the use of geodesign, or what is needed? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It does require a certain level of resources committed to it, I suppose. Like for the project, we were using a third-party software called like Geodesign Hub, so that's its own company. But I suppose it's the same answer for both questions, I suppose, because the people we worked with in the council had never done geodesign before. They were coming to it brand new. The participants themselves, like the community representatives and local officials, they'd never done anything like this. So they were completely kind of new to the topic. And they were able to engage with it. They were able to work with the software itself on that level, but they're able to kind of really wrangle with the big topics that were being discussed in that process. Just as a kind of example for this, for our way we did it, to get people kind of on board from brand new to being able to sit down for 3 hours and thrash these kind of topics out. It was a 1 hour introduction session where we just showed them how the software worked. And then we gave them, I'd say maybe 2 PDFs via email afterwards, where they're just able to read through and follow like an instruction booklet for how things are done. And that's maybe 5 pages of PDFs in total. So it is a quick way to get people on, because I think it cuts out a lot of the kind of I suppose the unnecessary discussions that might happen around this stuff. It just gets straight to the point with, here's a list of topics we're interested in, like flooding or zoning or roads, whatever. And it really specifies what that is. So if anyone has an opinion about something in particular, they're just able to voice it. And then after that point, there's a negotiation process that comes in where, let's just say if somebody knows a lot about a certain topic, like there's a specialist from the council who works on roads or whatever, they'd be able to, I suppose, give their feedback directly to somebody who's suggesting something that's out of their remit, let's just say. So there's a quicker process that happens there. Like my comparison was between like having a local authority produce a full report or a full local area development plan that suggests a number of new additions or whatever, and then it's kind of turned over to communities to come in with hundreds or thousands of comments about certain things, and then the council has to turn around to respond to them. This is a way of kind of getting to that at an earlier stage, I think, and addressing it in a far more quicker way. With regards to I suppose the ability for local authority to do that, I guess it would depend on who you ask. There's a lot of people who would probably need a lot more help to kind of get on board with that, I suppose, because it's a new tool to use. It's online. It requires a certain level of computer literacy. But again, like from our experience of it, an hour of workshop, again, just done online, and then a few PDFs, people were able to follow consistently pretty well.
Saul, thank you for that. I'm going to encourage anybody else who's got questions for Saul to put them into the chat line there. And just an observation from Philip Crowe, my co-PI, if we'd been able to have in-person workshops, we would still have used the Geodesign Hub software. So the technology is used as a drawing tool, but you can have a small group of people working around a computer with one another in real time or working online. Okay, thank you, Saul. So as I say, encourage more questions for Saul. Saul will keep an eye on the Q&A and he will respond to those there if there are any questions about geodesign. Next, Saul, we're going on to Alex Cameron Smith, who is the, God, it's a long title, I just have to check I've got it right. She's the Communities and Climate Change Engagement Coordinator for Pembroke Coastal Forum, and she's going to talk about engagement with school communities. So over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Karen. Just check you can hear me. Chiara is going to be sharing her screen.
We can hear you perfectly.
For me. Fantastic. That's brilliant. So hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about specifically the tools that we developed during CCAT for young people, and I'm going to be focused on one tool. If we could just stay on this bit for now, Chiara, at the top here. I just wanted to provide a bit of context as to, I suppose, why young people are really important. As you all know, as you can probably seen in the news, young people have been and continue to be a really important demographic for driving climate action. From school strikes and protests, a lot of them now lobby the politicians directly. They lead their local community groups, and they also, a lot of them, are running eco clubs in their schools. And there's a big push towards things in Pembrokeshire like sustainable schools and really schools focused on using more green energy. So that's really exciting. And so the development of the tools really align with that. And we also have noticed that there is more of a push now for teachers to integrate climate change into their lessons. But there is quite a lot out there, and it's a really rapidly developing field. And a lot of them have said to us that it feels overwhelming, and have requested guidance from us and through various programs that we run as well. So Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum also runs an educational programme called the Coastal Curriculum, and this is specifically helping out with taking kids to the coast to look at things like coastal change and providing education resources on topics like marine renewable energy. So really getting on board with that, and we've got a lot of contacts already through that programme, and they have contacted us throughout CCAT and before then, saying we really need help with some more resources and tools to use in our classroom. And we wanted to sort of help meet that need through CCAT. So yeah, there is a growing range of educational tools for use in the classroom on the topic of climate change, and it is becoming a saturated market. So within CCAT, the challenge really was to identify gaps in the market and see which tools that we could add that would actually be most useful and not just repeat something that was already out there. And during the research, we had a couple of months of research right at the start of the project, looking at what was already out there. And we found that there were quite a limited number of tools to develop climate change action plans outside of workshops for both adults and young people. So I was also looking at adult resources too. And there was no tool existing to share information about climate changes, impacts and adaptation actions in Wales, specifically in an accessible format as well, and using the latest climate change predictions data. So there is this need also to develop tools to address the imbalance between mitigation and adaptation. And I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with the definitions of those. And actually, when we did research, we found that most tools that are available to help schools and to help the public are currently focused on mitigation. So that is directly reducing emissions. And these can be things like carbon calculators. WWF has a really famous one that they have on their website. Recycling initiatives, reducing consumption and waste, energy meters, and also things like electric vehicle charging points. And all these tools are really important, but there was a gap to develop these adaptation tools. If you could scroll down to the next bit of text, Chiara, thank you. So when we were thinking about this tool, we started off developing a tool for use in workshops with people in a local coastal community in Pembrokeshire as part of a project working with Natural Resources Wales, and we will share some more information about that specific project with you afterwards. And through this tool, we wanted to take people through a process of prioritising. So starting with looking at what they perceived to be the most important changes in climate for them living at the coast. So these are things like extreme weather events, rising sea levels, noticing temperature changes or seasonal changes. Really interesting looking at also things like changes in wildlife breeding seasons and migration. We wanted to explore all of those, big wide range of changes. And then after this, we wanted people to prioritise the top impacts that these changes could have in their local area. We're looking at things like the economy and housing, things like power supplies, how climate change could affect energy, and also things like accessibility for emergency services, which is quite an interesting one as well, and that lots of people don't really think about. And the last part of this process was we knew that we wanted to end on an optimistic note. So thinking about and again prioritising the most significant climate actions that people have noticed that are already happening in their local area, or that they want to happen and are not already happening locally. So this could be things like developing an emergency plan for evacuation in case of flooding, or even building flood protection, which is a really, really popular one, looking after the vulnerable people, and also interestingly things like citizen science and getting people to actually report the changes they see in the environment too. And as part of this process, we also wanted to establish who people thought were responsible for taking these actions. So again, figuring out what people's attitudes were towards whose responsibility it is, which is an interesting angle to then potentially drive action. So at the end of this process, we envisaged that this would give us a rough climate action plan that we could hand back to the community and ideally local public service bodies and authorities to implement. So when we were thinking about this, we had discussions on what the tool could look like, and we decided we wanted these climate changes, impacts and actions to be represented as sets of cards, which people could physically move around. To make the climate changes deck, we set about getting information and climate change data from sources like the Met Office and the IPCC reports, and translating the key data points into something simple. So getting localized data for Wales where possible. And Chiara's just zooming in on a few of the cards there so you can get an idea of what they look like. For the impacts and actions decks, we got the information from existing adaptation plans from the Welsh Government and also Fingal County Council, who Saul was just saying, speaking from, and one of the CCAT partners as well. So to design the cards, we scoured an online database of icons and put those on each card to represent the information that was on there. And we also employed a designer to put the words and icons together in an accessible colour scheme. And the text was also translated to create a separate set of Welsh cards. And we always wanted these to be a tool used in facilitating workshops to guide and structure discussions between people, mainly who would have quite varying opinions on what needs to be done. And ideally, we saw these running for an hour or so in person at a community hall or public venue, exploring conversations in small groups, and they would have multiple decks of these cards to use in person. So we actually ended up printing a prototype and testing it with CCAT partners at one of our biannual meetings with generally pretty good feedback. As Chiara is showing you a bit more of the card, I'll just talk a little bit about COVID and some of our challenges there. So as Saul mentioned, pretty early on in the project, we had to deal with COVID lockdowns, and we had to take a little bit of time within the CCAT team to stop and regroup. And at that time, there was no end of the restrictions in sight. So we, as Saul mentioned earlier, we decided to make the project completely digital, which completely flipped things on its head and had big implications for us with this card tool. So no longer being able to run in-person workshops meant we had to either abandon this tool completely or find a way to make it work within an online setting. So this led to us testing various online platforms and uploading the cards in digital format. As you can see from Chiara's moving around there, that is kind of how it would look in the online platform. And we decided on a tool called Mural, which some of you might have used. There's another similar one called Miro, but it kind of worked really well in displaying all the cards and in terms of interaction. And throughout late 2020 and early 2021, we managed to run 12 workshops online with various stakeholder groups using an online platform called Mural, as I said. So with schools, we found they were completely overwhelmed with the impacts of COVID, as most other industries and businesses and public sectors. And with the schools as well, the goalposts seem to change every week. And in response to that, we decided to suspend running any workshops in person in schools for the foreseeable future. But while we were waiting, we did decide to create a version of the cards for secondary school students. So adapting the cards we already had. And we aimed this at ages 14-year-olds and upwards. That's about year 9 for people in England and Wales, and cutting down the number of cards and also reducing the amount of text on each card as well, just to make it a bit easier for kids to handle the decks. And in April 2021, there seemed to be a bit of hope that we may be able to go into schools again. But again, by that time, it's almost the end of the school year. So there was a bit of a race against time because that end of the school year was coming up. And we got an email from a teacher from Milford Haven School in May, and we were invited to do workshops with 2 of her year 9 classes, which was pretty exciting. So then when we went in, over the course of the hour, we worked through this activity that I just talked about, sort of working through the changes, impacts and actions with the kids. And it seemed to be a real success. So the kids liked the colours and the text and the icons. And yeah, they seemed to have no sort of problems understanding the language and the meaning and purpose. So that was really great to have that feedback from them. And as Chiara is showing there, we used a feedback board where the kids would self-analyze their feelings and learning about climate change before and after the lesson. So I sort of designed these rough diagrams here, which were scale, but also like a kind of emoji style emotions board. And people, the kids would put 2 different colored stickers on sliding scales before, which were the red stickers, and after the session, which were yellow stickers. And hopefully you can sort of see that there's a general shift on the right-hand scale there towards the right. So that indicates that kids towards the end of the workshop had better understanding and knowledge of climate change. And on the left there, that emotions chart, it was actually really also interesting to see the change or any differences in emotions that the kids felt sort of before and after. And some of them actually sort of shifted to more negative emotions, but others shifted to sort of more positive emotions. But they were definitely thinking about it more. and we got quite good feedback from the teacher as well. And the main challenge I found with the schools is squeezing that all into an hour, and it actually eats up quite a lot of time. Occasionally, you get the kids' attention spans wandering a bit, but we did account for that time and generally got a lot of good engagement with most of the class. So that was really good and really positive. So going on forward with our sort of legacy and next steps, with the schools, ideally we think it would work best to be there in person to sort of facilitate an initial workshop, and then ideally hand over to teachers to continue using the cards in a way that suited them and their different classes and abilities. And we envisaged the cards as an adaptable tool to help them integrate climate change issues into their lessons. So we thought along these lines, we would produce an activity pack for teachers with suggested activities that they could do in the classroom with the card decks. And these ranged from games to field trips, and they could pick whatever they wanted to do, depending on how much time they had, how many staff they had. And we also produced a Welsh version of this card deck and activity pack as well. And Chiara zooming in on one of the activities there that we put in part of the pack. So yes, so as going forward, we want to continue to promote the cards as a resource that teachers can download and print off. And to assist with in-classroom sessions, we have also arranged to print a hard copy of these cards and distribute those to all of the schools in Pembrokeshire as well, so they all have a copy of that. Fundamentally, going forward, we know that COVID isn't over, and we need to really carry on being sensitive to the needs of schools and communities and respond to that with different tools and different types of working with them. And if people do request in-person workshops, we are really happy to deliver those. So we really hope that those sort of requests will go forward, and there'll be a lot more requests basically for us to come in and do these workshops in schools, and also support the teachers using these cards. And we see them being used quite a lot, hopefully. And another thing I wanted to mention is that we are also involved in a working group with the Met Office to hopefully get more detailed climate change data for Wales and help develop data products which would be useful to keep tools like our climate change cards up to date. And that means they would be more relevant to local communities and schools. So interestingly, when I was looking at this, the only data point they really had available was for Cardiff, and living in Pembrokeshire and sort of the rural coastal side of things there, a lot of the changes that you might see might not be relevant, and they're not going to be the same as an urban setting as Cardiff. So we're really working on getting that data, more granularity in that data for Wales. And so we envisaged that we might have to reprint these cards and redesign them every couple of years in line with the new IPCC data, which the next few reports are coming out in the next year. And we're going to take account of more accurate and available climate models in our tools as we go forward. And I'm happy to, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alex. Right, going to the questions. There was one question from an anonymous contributor that I asked. It was related to Saul's presentation. I think he's dealing with that, though the question has disappeared off the line, so I'm not quite sure what's happened there. But and then there's a question, Robert's question, and I think this is relating to this. He says, within your online platform, did you develop any approaches to getting young people involved in understanding how coastal systems really function, as distinct from the development of an understanding of climate change impacts and possible adaptation responses and needed actions for coasts?
That's a really
That's to you,
question. Yeah. Thanks, Robert. So within the timescale that we had for these workshops, we did have to focus in on going through that process. But again, we realised that was quite a pilot workshop for the schools. So we, if we did have more time, we would probably try to integrate understanding on how coastal systems work as part of our coastal curriculum program, and part of the field trip side of things. We do integrate that part of learning into those workshops, but they tend to be sort of half-day activities, because by the time you get the schools to the coast, and that's pretty much at least a half a day for schools to do that. But we work with various local experts on looking at coastal change. So I think there is a huge potential to sort of make that more of an integrated approach and learning. But the workshops in the classrooms have to be focused on that specific thing. But I think we will try and integrate more of those coastal systems and processes into our education programs in the future for sure. And that's something that we will carry on developing at PCF.
A few other questions have come in and some nice endorsements. They're coming in and both. If you try and keep the questions on the Q&A, it's a little easier. 2 short questions, and then Alex, I might ask you then to keep an eye on the Q&A. There may be some more to address there. One from Marianne, is this activity pack very specific to Wales, or is it something that could be used in coastal regions in Ireland? And related to that, another question on the chat line is, do you think the resources could be adapted for younger children? That's from Graham and the Pembrokeshire Coast. So I'll let you answer those 2, and then if you can, we'll answer the other ones in the Q&A chat line, and we'll go on to the next speaker. So if you just want to take those 2, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, MaREI. And we actually already have developed a version for Ireland, and that was Saul and Chiara have both helped with that, and they've started to use those with the local authorities up in Ireland, and I think with potentially with schools going forward as well. So there has been already a pack produced specifically for Ireland. And can you remind me the other question, Karen? Sorry.
Can it be adapted to younger children? Could the pack be adapted for use?
Yeah, we are looking at that. I think that would require quite a bit more input from teachers that we'd be working with. So we didn't want to just design these cards. We really are interested in co-creation of looking at teachers' input and education professionals' input. So we will be probably seeing as if we can talk to potentially primary school teachers as well going forward, and looking at developing this for younger kids. I think there is definitely a potential, but we would definitely want some input from the teachers that we're working with the cards to check that we are at the right, functioning these cards at the right level.
Thanks for that, Alex. And any other questions, put them in the Q&A line and Alex will get back to you on those. So we're going on to our 3rd speaker before we take a break, just coming up to 11 o'clock. So we've got Lauren Blacklaw-Jones from the Port of Milford Haven. She is the Community Engagement and Communications Coordinator, and she's going to talk about tools for engaging with communities of place.
Thank you, Karen. Oh, 1 second here. Right. Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Blacklaw-Jones, the Community Engagement and Communications Coordinator at the Port of Milford Haven, one of the Welsh partners. And I'm going to do a bit about the Coastal Communities Growing Together project. Coastal communities are at a significant risk of climate impact, such as coastal erosion or flood damage, and community involvement in local climate actions, such as tree planting, are an important collective response. Tree planting is quite a high-profile response to climate change currently, and it is widely recognised as an important nature-based response to climate impacts and as a creative approach to raising awareness of climate change. However, while CCAT was keen to take advantage of this existing avenue to engaging about climate change, we also recognise that tree planting initiatives are often oversimplified in design, often focusing on a one-off event rather than considering the life cycle of trees and the possibility this offers for long-term community engagement with the climate and biodiversity crises. Coastal Communities Growing Together aimed to broaden, therefore, the potential of tree planting initiatives by addressing the need for ongoing community engagement with climate actions. In line with the new curriculum for Wales, trees offer an ongoing source of education opportunities, of course, indoors and out. As such, we developed a tree planting project with a difference. School community groups along the Haven Waterway were not only offered free trees as a resource, but also the opportunity to get hands-on experience learning, crucially from the very beginning of the project, and with, of course, the ongoing opportunities throughout. We were keen to engage with local communities about climate change by building on the current popularity of tree planting, a route that the community are open to and already looking for opportunities to engage with. Of course, this was an important opportunity to investigate participatory mapping for us and digital tools to educate about the wider context of tree planting and how it's not simply about planting any tree anywhere. You really must consider the whole picture. So the purpose was to educate about the local environment, broaden understanding of climate actions and specifically nature-based solutions that individuals and communities can be part of themselves. In order to achieve this, participants needed to first understand the importance of the right species and their choices. So the project steps were broken down that participants needed to complete an online learning phase. So the groups were provided with a range of resources that we developed, the species and planting guide. I think Chiara's on it there. The species and planting guide, the tree planting for climate change guide, and in addition, some other resources that we directed people to, for example, the Welsh Government's Glacier Woodland Creation Map, which would help them learn about different native species and how to choose the best sites to plant them in as part of their approach. Next, schools liaised with Pembrokeshire Coast National Parks and Tir Coed, which I'll tell you more about in a second, to discuss their species and planting locations. Then the participants registered and reserved their trees using the online GeoSurvey tool, which I think Chiara might demonstrate shortly. Next, participants received the delivery of their trees in line with COVID regulations at the time, which I shall also touch on shortly. And finally, participants planted their trees and agreed to document their experience for us. After which they then uploaded that media content and made comments and gave feedback on the initiative using the Record Your Experience survey, which is still on the website for your to look at afterwards. So we partnered with Tir Coed and Pembrokeshire Coast National Park's Roots project as authorities in Wales, both on woodland management and on the conservation and enhancement of Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, to provide guidance and support with which we were then able to develop the species and planting guide that I mentioned, and the tree planting for climate change elements of the website that Chiara demonstrated. This was an important step in the process, developed to provide this information simply, but also remotely. And like I said, participants agreed to digest this content before reserving their trees. So between them, these sources identified the varying benefits of the species, the habitats they create and the wildlife they support, and the varying ways in which planting trees on a local level can help communities connect with and build a deeper understanding of nature-based solutions within their own power. Participants then liaised with Tir Coed and Pembrokeshire Coast National Park for clear and explicit conversations around their specific purposes for tree planting and the corresponding most appropriate locations for their chosen trees. And on the web app that we directed the participants to the external maps about the natural environment in Wales, which also offer additional guidance on selecting appropriate spots for the trees. For example, Coastland School in St Ishmael's were particularly focused on sustainability and growing food locally. So CCAT and Pembrokeshire Coast National Park worked with them to design and provide an orchard. On the other hand, Pembroke Dock Community Primary wanted to tackle a consistently boggy patch of school ground, which was prone to flooding. And so the Tir Coed advisors worked in tandem with our species and planting guide to advise on the best species to tackle these flooded areas. Participants engaged with the digital tools from the beginning by using surveys to collect project input and to measure impact, and participatory mapping tools to map the location of the trees. So you can see there, that's all of the locations that were involved. The tools we used allowed us to collate the map and this information, all the results, in a clear and engaging way too, that you can see there on the dashboard. The user-friendly tools of the web app went on to provide real-time monitoring of the initiative in the format of this dashboard, including details of the number of schools, community groups involved, the number of trees planted, spatial distribution of the trees, as well as the carbon sequestration and biodiversity benefits resulting from the tree planting activity, in terms that are relevant to people's everyday experiences, which we felt was quite important. For example, like the total amount of CO2 captured translated into the number of journeys between two local destinations. I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. So you can, along the bottom there, you can move between the tabs under the pie charts to see a breakdown of the community response. And within that table there, you can also move between the results of the schools and the community groups as well. So it's a really clever tool that lets you look back on what you've done and what you've achieved. So whilst the immediate and obvious results of reducing carbon dioxide via tree planting is typically a form of mitigation, this project includes both adaptation and mitigation. Ecosystem restoration is important for humanity moving forward. Therefore, supporting social and habitual adaptation in tree planting will help us transition to a more sustainable way of life. As Karen previously mentioned, when the pandemic struck, we had some serious thinking to do, because how do you engage with the community without access to the community? So the project went digital, which kind of forced more innovative thinking, certainly from us at the Port of Milford Haven. Whilst the project was designed to promote in-person tree planting activity as a way to directly connect communities to nature and the environment, we recognise that in a time of social isolation and limited movement, innovative digital education and engagement was absolutely essential. Now, you might have guessed it was a bit more of a challenge to organise this project in the midst of a pandemic, and you'd be right. For example, the conflicting pressures of time meant that the sooner in winter the trees were planted, the better. And yet the later in the year, the better from the perspective of easing COVID restrictions. So when it came down to it, the actual planting was possible during a small window in April last year, when we could still plant the trees, but which also overlapped with restrictions here in Wales easing somewhat. So this meant that it was, in a sense, really well timed, because people were so keen to get outside together again. Whilst we were able to engage with schools and community groups, we had also intended to reach individuals within the eligible area within the same project as well. So another impact of COVID was that the complexities of social distancing and restrictions meant juggling the deliveries and collections of trees for the individuals was going to be too much. So involving individuals was unfortunately not possible. Of course, there were other more mundane impacts too, like the usual connectivity issues during online meetings, extra risk assessments for the rangers and advisors and so on. Teachers in particular were short of time in this constantly changing situation. Like Alex mentioned, the goalposts were always moving. So if we were to do this again, we'd look at streamlining the processes of application and reporting for our monitoring and evaluation purposes. However, whilst there were challenges created by COVID, as I said before, the pandemic was also an opportunity to explore tools that might not have been available to us otherwise. We would have planned more in-person engagement around the species selection and the care and maintenance of trees too, with interest from the activity leaders in delivering some evening sessions. It had restrictions permitted, but unfortunately that wasn't to be. So it created the opportunity for us to explore other digital avenues for this engagement. In terms of legacy, CCAT went on to develop a locally relevant bilingual Trees for Change carbon calculator in response to the significant local appetite for the tree planting initiative. So this multi-page digital tool built on the success of the Coastal Communities Growing Together initiative, and it provides local schools and residents with an educational resource with which to continue their adaptation journey. So the tool will allow the user to select the appropriate trees, the age of the trees and the number of the trees, calculate the amount of carbon captured by those trees, and they could be trees that already exist, or they could be trees that you're planning to plant. And crucially, it then goes on to tell you what the equivalent amount of carbon corresponds to in familiar experiences, like local journeys or scrolling through social media or boiling the kettle. It will then give examples of the species that the selected trees will provide habitats for, reinforcing the importance of the wider role of resilient biodiversity in tackling climate change. Finally, the results page will direct the user to tips for reducing their own carbon footprint on the next page there. We created this because members of the community and non-experts often hear complex values and scientific terms within the context of climate change. And that's something that we heard quite regularly from the teachers. We understand that trees sequester carbon, but can you tell us more about that? Although the data informing the calculations in this tool is applicable anywhere in the UK, the specific activity examples in the results that have been designed and presented in a local context to reinforce and relate the connection between the science and carbon calculations and everyday experiences familiar to members of the community. So you can see there, for example, those are journeys between Pembroke Dock and Milford Haven, for example. The calculator goes on to support social and habitual adaptations by understanding the bigger picture described in Coastal Communities Growing Together. For example, countering soil erosion, creating shade, habitat restoration, and increasing biodiversity all help to build resilience in natural systems and society. Ecosystem restoration is important for humanity moving forward, and tree planting plays a part in helping us to transition to a more sustainable way of life. Equally, understanding our own contribution to climate change is the first step in behaviour change, and therefore an additional reason to explain these impacts in terms of common experiences. In addition to this, the tool signposts both young people and adults to additional verified sources on how to reduce one's own carbon footprint, and users are reporting an increase in knowledge and understanding of climate change impacts after using this tool. The increasing focus on engaging citizens in nature-based solutions through participatory initiatives often depends on the use of web apps, which use proprietary tools and require GIS skills or skills in programming experience. This poses difficulties, we understand, for research teams or community engagement practitioners who may lack the necessary technical expertise to create these bespoke apps. In addition, many of these existing open source tools are project specific and require advanced programming skills, or the proprietary tools incur large license fees. The Coastal Communities Growing Together web app overcomes these challenges to enable non-experts to develop their own participatory initiative. This web app uses cloud-based technologies to provide online templates that other researchers within our partner organisation, University College Dublin, can use to quickly deploy similar community engagement initiatives with their own content and without the need to invest much effort and resources into the development of a new tool. And finally, it's worth noting that this initiative will be featured in a Welsh Government carbon copy case study as a legacy activity from COP26 and COP Cymru. In addition, the Coastal Communities Growing Together was awarded the runner-up prize of University College Dublin Impact Case Study Competition, who commented that this was a very interesting citizen science project with great stakeholder engagement, resulting in valuable societal impacts. A template of the Coastal Communities Growing Together web app and community response dashboard, including the environmental indicators and carbon calculator 2, will be freely available to researchers for future participatory initiatives via the UCD Earth Institute. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions now.
Lauren, thank you very much. We're now going to go to one of our other research scientists. It's Chiara Cocco, who's a research scientist at UCD. We're staying in the area of tools for engaging with communities of place, and she's going to talk about one project that took place in Pembrokeshire.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. You see my screen, right?
We can, yes. Yep, I'm going to switch.
Okay, good. Thank you. So as Lauren pointed out, local action can play a major role in our response to climate change, like the tree planting initiative, but it's worth to mention that the big adaptation process that is happening in the Milford Haven waterway is the development of a world-class marine energy and engineering center of excellence at Pembroke Dock. So this project that you can see here in this official video of the port, I'm just going to show you. So it's essential for the region to make the energy transition away from fossil fuels and towards low carbon renewable energy technologies. So throughout its history, this dockyard has always evolved to meet the needs of the nation, and in the face of this climate crisis is doing so again. So it was important for the port to engage with local communities and build an understanding of this new adaptation. So it is in this context that a community engagement activity I'm going to describe in the next, let's say, 10 minutes, and try to keep it short, took place. So starting with the assumption that achieving community and stakeholder support is vital to increasing awareness of the potential impacts of green and blue infrastructure in the area, not only in terms of economy, but also in terms of their ecological impact. So however, it's worth to mention that all these resources will be available for you. So you can always have a look of the full video, and also just to mention that also in the other presentation, you saw that there are different tabs, and in most of the situation we are focusing on one or two, but you can always have a look of the other tools we have developed within CCAT once we share the links with you. Whilst we look at the benefit and technical feature of this important development, we must also consider and celebrate the significant heritage of the port. So the past and future are, after all, two sides of the same story. So as the leader of this project, the Port of Milford has been as a number of heritage mitigation commitment to deliver, and have identified some areas of the historical port that would benefit from these announcements, such as the green and the green area known as Carriage Drive, and you can see in these then and now maps here. So this is the area highlighted is Carriage Drive, and also in these then and now images. So you see it's kind of a linear park right at the outside of the port walls here in Pembroke Dock. So in order to engage with the community to collect ideas for the restoration of this historic part of the dock, we created a digital platform for community collaboration. So this allowed the collective reimagination of the space to produce a better, more focused, more community-focused space, celebrating all the phases of the dockyard life. So the ArcGIS Story Maps tool has been used in combination with the specialized GeoSurvey developed by Geodesign Hub company that is, as Saul mentioned, is an external part of this CCAT project that we have been using and testing some of the tools developed by this company. And you can have a look here. This is an interactive card, and if you click here, once you have the links of the story map, you can have a look of the Geodesign Hub company page. So in this way, we were able to tell the story of the area, make it virtually available using innovative technologies that I'm going to show you, and collect spatial distributed design proposals for the area. So at the very beginning of this project, we started sourcing the digital resources, including, for example, drone footage, historic and current images, and boundary information to be then presented on the web page in an interactive and easy to understand format. So the area has been made available using 360 videos. Here I'm going to show you one of those videos. Those are on YouTube. They're fully embedded on this story map. Sorry for if you heard the audio. So this is a 3D video that shows a part of the carriage drive, and there are 4 of them. As you can see in this map, with the starting point highlighted, and you can see explore the area using the 3D video, but also the 3D photos. So here it's going to appear. Oh, here is it. So these are important historic buildings of the area, and all of them have been kind of presented in these 360 videos. Another interesting tool is this interactive map, where you can have a clear idea of boundaries and ownership of the various areas surrounding Carriage Drive, also including measurements and further photos. For example, this is the Heritage Center, which is an important historic building of the area. In this timeline, you can see historic maps and photos of the dockyard at the various points of its history. So starting from 1824 till 1959, and here this beautiful satellite imageries and aerial photos describe the evolution of the port. And this is also another interesting historic video of from dating 1940s. So for each of the sorry, there's another tool I wanted to show. This is the historic features map, where all the important buildings are highlighted. And if you click on one of these pins, they will soon appear. So you see details on the of the building. What it was, what is now, and a series of historic images presenting the story. So for each of these, of the three, jump directly into the surveys, for each of the three categories, so categories of intervention, so environmental, heritage, and amenities, we have a participatory mapping tool that was available along with a breakdown of the current proposed improvement to the area. For example, here for the environment, we have tree management and risk landscaping of the area. So the tool, the mapping tool, is designed to allow citizens to identify on the map specific areas that they want to improve, select the type of intervention, and then add a more detailed description here in the in this section. So the consultation was launched in July last year and ran for 3 weeks. Posters and flyers like this one were distributed in Pembrokeshire, and stakeholder groups, specific stakeholder groups were contacted by email and social media. And in addition, 2 public workshops were held at the Heritage. Oh, here is the poster, sorry. 2 workshops were held at the Heritage Centre and further session held at the Maritime Museum. At both workshops, the wider Pembrokeshire infrastructure project was presented, along with the purposes of this CCAT Carriage Drive initiative, and the community responses were collected using 4 devices, 4 digital devices, and both institutions then further promoted the activities, which was also published on 2 local newspapers. And here you have the link to those news. So we collected more than 400 responses. The ideas submitted have been analyzed and will be considered in the ongoing and future strategies to reviving Carriage Drive. The results were published to an additional resource tab on the story map, and that includes interactive dashboards and an A4 poster that I'm going to show you now. So environmental improvements were the second most important outcome of the consultation after the celebration of the history and heritage, as you can see here. Reviving biodiversity and wildlife habitats alongside improving the space for the community is a top recurring theme. And here you see all the breakdowns of the different ideas proposed by the community, divided by the 3 categories: heritage, environmental, amenities. And this poster was kind of shared with the community in Pembrokeshire. So the use of interactive maps and dashboards allows the result to be displayed in a visually appealing form to be then presented back to the community. So specific zones and location for each idea were recorded, and including the number of times this idea was submitted, so somehow identifying the popularity of each of the interventions. And there was also the possibility to vote for these ideas, votes and comments. So it was quite interesting to see which are the most popular suggestions. So participants of the in-person workshops were generally retired members of the public, heritage enthusiasts, and volunteers of either the Heritage Center or the Maritime Museum. This was predicted to be the case, and as such, a tool and community hub were developed to engage primarily with this target audience. Quotes were collected during the events via email and from the consultation results, which further indicate the success of this initiative. Here is a short clip from John Evans from the Heritage Center. again, you can have a look at these at this video. And but despite pandemic challenges, the Pembroke Dock Heritage Centre acted as a community hub for the direction of the consultation. And in fact, a PC station was available at the historic centre to collect ideas, and also there were some volunteers of the Heritage Centre guiding on how to fill the survey. So this was the setting, and but young people engagement has been limited due to COVID-19 control measures. Several field trips were planned with local school children to test, especially the mobile version of this tool, and collect ideas in situ. But these activities couldn't take place. But this is interesting to mention that the 360 videos and images tours allow to make the sites virtually accessible to all, especially during lockdown. And so some activity could be carried out within schools. So the participatory elements of this consultation provided the community and stakeholders with a voice and opportunity to come together and collaborate in reimagining the space and produce a joint vision for Carriage Drive. So the port and the local authorities have now access to a dynamic hyperlocal data which illustrates local steps and improvements highlighted as necessary by the community. And this was part of a co-creation exercise. And here I've highlighted some reflections and opportunities. So the number of suggestions submitted and enhancements exceeded our expectation. So this is important to let us understand that it's a sensitive topic, and also the tool was quite easy to use. So due to the high number of submissions, the analysis of the survey data was more time consuming than allowed for. So more than a suggestion were made in a specific submission. So we had to analyze those, and if we are doing this activity again, we would allow more time for this task, which is quite important. And so all these is a testimonial of the strong community appetite to develop Carriage Drive, so enabling its wider use as a community resource, which is currently definitely unused. And so as a result of this initiative, the port's community engagement toolkit has been broadened to include proven technological tools and methods that the community will engage with. And this will enable the port to engage with the wider communities, seek a broader range of funding opportunities, and engage with further research projects. So as Lauren just mentioned, so we have developed a series of online participatory mapping activities. So just remind you, we have the tree planting initiative, the Reviving Carriage Drive public consultation, and another interesting project, which is climate changes, impacts and actions that Alex mentioned, and that was developed in the Heavens community in Pembrokeshire. And you can have here, there is a dedicated tab if you want to know more about these projects. So all these tools will be available as a configurable template within the Earth Institute's Citizen Observatory, so that researchers within UCD and other partner organizations can use to quickly deploy similar community engagement initiatives. And here you can find a draft of this hub of this platform. So different users will use the tool with different roles of starting from the UCD researcher, which will act as the project owner, to the citizens, which will play the role of active contributor in future initiatives. So this so considering all these users, we have also considered different aspects in the design of the user experience, so such as skills and expertise, interests, which led then to here, this is the analysis, for example, of the user type 1, which is the project owner. all these analyses led then to the development of a website wireframe that will be soon implemented using ArcGIS technologies. So we are, over the past months, we are working therefore with the UCD Earth Institute that will also further develop the Citizen Observatory, so to ensure that the core component of the CCAT legacy leave behind the project. And this tool will significantly enhance UCD researchers' ability to engage with local communities and stakeholders and better understand the challenges they face. For example, a project led by researchers within the UCD School of Archaeology will use the climate changes impact actions templates to crowdsource information of Irish vulnerable coastal heritage sites, while the UCD Centre for Irish Town will use the Carriage Drive template in a community engagement project in County Mayo. So there is going to be definitely a future for all these participatory mapping tools, and we in the last weeks of the project we are working for this. Transfer all the knowledge to the Earth Institute. And thanks. I think I've done, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Just finding my unmute button. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Chiara. That's excellent. Couple of things. I'm, as I say, a landscape architect. It's brilliant to see tools that we can actually have a virtual field trip. We can bring the site to people. During a pandemic, that's not possible. And there's also times when people may not be able to access the site for whatever reason. But the other important thing about your presentation, which answers one of the questions that Liz had, wondering where these tools would be held after the life of CCAT, which really is ending at the moment. And you've introduced the Citizens Observatory that Philip will talk a little bit more at the end. I see one. We were okay for one question. I see one question there for the Carriage Drive project. Do the results show whether certain groups were able to dominate the preferred outcomes? For example, how many times could the same people keep adding the same suggestions, perhaps to advance a particular agenda? A very good question.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. Yeah. Well, I think in this case, this was not the case because we are dealing with really enthusiastic people that are interested in the future of the area, and mostly, as I said, retired people, adults, which were mostly using the tool within the Heritage Center, and so I don't think we had that kind of phenomena. But we tested the tool with school children, and we saw that definitely there is the possibility to force the submission process, kind of voting and commenting on the same proposal. But this is also why the analysis of the results took so long, because we have tried to identify those phenomenon and kind of clean the data so that there was no such an influence. Of course, this is the problem when you deal with anonymous surveys, but at the same time, collecting personal information we know is quite difficult and will require a lot of work in terms of ethics, and so we decided to keep it anonymous and to really focus on the analysis of the results to avoid these.
Thank you. So if there's any other questions for Chiara, please put them in the question and answer tab. And we shall go on now to the next presentation, which comes from Fernanda Stori. And she's based at, she's a postdoctoral researcher at the University College Cork in MaREI, and she's looking again at tools for engaging with communities of practice. So thank you, Fernanda.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for your attention. So I'm going to present our tools for engaging with communities of practice. So I'm going to present regarding our longitudinal study, which was based and provided information for many CCAT tools, such as our animation, the card game version to Ireland, and also VR and virtual reality and augmented reality application. So first, I'm going to talk about some evidence of climate change in coastal areas. So more than 600 million people, which is around 10% of the world's population, live in coastal areas that are less than 10 meters above the sea level, which is quite critical for in considering sea level rise predictions. According to researchers, by 2050, around 300 million people will fall below the elevation of our average annual coastal flood. And by the end of the century, around 200 million people could live permanently below the high tide line. So estimates for Ireland indicate that approximately 350 square kilometers of the Irish coast would be vulnerable under sea level rise of 1 meter and 600 square kilometers under a sea level rise of 3 meters. So this is very important considering that some areas in Ireland are less than or quite less than 2 meters of higher above the sea level. So Borough Beach in Portrane, Fingal, North County Dublin, is representative of how this sustained coastal erosion and flooding process as a result of storm surge and continuous sea level rise are impacting coastal communities in Ireland. So we decided to study this process in Borough Beach, at Borough Beach, Portrane, and which is also representative on how the lack of coordinated coastal climate adaptation governance can hamper climate action and further exacerbate the problem. So we conducted a literature review considering all the reports about Borough Beach and Rogerstown Estuary in Portrane, Fingal. The longitudinal study is entitled Coastal Climate Adaptation in Ireland, the Effects of Climate Change in Portrane and Future Perspectives. This study was aimed to support Fingal County Council in managing responses to the impacts of climate change, illustrated by this continued process of coastal erosion, and also prospective sea level rise and flooding scenarios. So the objective of this study was to present a baseline assessment and provide a greater understanding on the impact of climate change on coastal areas globally, and also bring up-to-date sea level rise predictions. We provided geological, historical, and environmental aspects of Portrane and of Rogerstown Estuary coastal habitat. So you can see here in this PDF embedded in the story map, the sessions of the report. Also, the coastal changes experienced over time at Borough Beach, the current and future scenarios predicted for Portrane, according to studies conducted by RPS Consultancy Company. And we finished the report with a compendium of relevant legislation, plans and policies related to coastal climate adaptation at local and regional and national levels. So we reviewed around 35 laws, policies, and plans related to coastal climate adaptation in Ireland. So our study concludes that despite this extensive law and policy framework, the current governance system has failed to respond to past and current coastal changes in many localities in the coast of Ireland, represented by the case of Portrane. So this study concludes suggesting the institution of a national coastal management framework to deal with the current and future risks of coastal erosion and flooding, and support implementation of the sustainable adaptation solutions in Ireland. And it recommends key principles for the implementation of this national framework. By clicking in this report, you can read the report directly from this STORI map that you receive the link by the end of the webinar. But you also can download the full-size report by clicking on this link. And to support local authorities in Ireland, and as well as coastal communities in having access to all those policies, law, and plans that we review, we developed a STORI map summarizing the main aspects of these policies. So by clicking in Get Started, I'm going to change my view. You'll be led to this STORI map, Coastal Climate Adaptation in Ireland, which is composed by an introduction section, then the National Coastal Climate Adaptation Framework, which is important to the whole Ireland, and then the regional and local coastal climate adaptation framework towards Dublin Greater Region and also Fingal region. This diagram shows you the 4 categories of policies analyzed. So coastal development, climate, and biodiversity at national, regional, and local level. And we also prepared, in collaboration of an intern student, law student from Peking University, China, Qingri, we developed a timeline, interactive timeline. By clicking on the timeline, you can zoom in, zoom out, and also have more information about the policy, and also find the full report in the main website where this policy is hosted. Then in the second button, the National Coastal Climate Adaptation Framework, you can read a summary of all the national policies we reviewed. You can also go to a mobile version, which is a mobile-friendly version to read in your cell phone. And you can also read the summary of those policies. And by clicking in the PDF embedded, you can read the policy and also pop up, read in another tab, or download it in this link in the title, download it from the main website where the policy is hosted. So we have this for coastal zone management policies, planning and development, and climate change. Regarding regional and local policies that we review, you will also find a mobile version, and as same, you can read the report online or pop up in another window or download the full report from the main website. And same for Fingal County Council policies since the beginning of the century. So going back to my main presentation, as I said, all this information provided data for the development of VR, virtual reality application. I'm going to play the video. So this application was developed in partnership with UCD computer science researchers, Xingxuan Xu and Professor Dante Abe Campbell. So the title of this application is a virtual tour of Portland. So we gather information regarding the existing coastal ecosystems, the ecosystem services this provides. So you can see the 5 points of interest, so the visitor can go through the points. We also have an embedded video that I'm going to show it later to explain better the characteristics of those ecosystems. I'm going to jump a little bit on the video. The user can also find information about species of fauna and flora in this habitat, existing environmental protection in the area, and likely impacts of climate change. So the user can play with these buttons and go to 2050 and to 2100 and see the predictions, the real predictions for sea level rise at Borough Beach. So this video is showing the buttons regarding ecosystem services and local characteristics. So you can watch the full video on CCAT YouTube channel. And also the application shows the 5 points of interest. So the user is moving around the peninsula of Portrane here. And now this application is being converted to an augmented reality application, which can be used by using your cell phone. So it will be an in situ application. So the visitor go to the place, to Portrane, and arriving at the point, like point 1, the visitor can point the cell phone camera to the point, and then the application will display all those information and also the simulation of sea level rise. So it would be a augmented reality. You have the real scene in your cell phone, but with the how can I say, this virtual reality in front of the real scene. So this is the difference between virtual and augmented reality. So the video that is embedded in this virtual reality is the Rogerstone Estuary Coastal Habitat, which is another star map that the CCAT team prepared. It explains the 5 points of interest of the virtual tour around Portrane, and also provides maps about these coastal ecosystems, which are protected by the Rogerstone Estuary Special Area of Conservation and the Rogerstone Estuary Special Protection Area. So the visitor, the user will find information about these 5 points that they can visit, and also the video and the star map shows the coastal habitats of the Rogerstone Estuary, such as marine habitat, so the mapping of those protected areas, salt marsh habitat, dune habitat, and also the shapefiles of the conservation areas. So this is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thanks.
Fernanda, thank you very much for that. I must say, from an Irish perspective, I found this a really interesting document to have all the policy information located in one place for Portrane. That was particularly good. And of course, some of the virtual reality you've been working with is very interesting as well. A few comments just in the chat line about really liking the resource. I see one comment from somebody who grew up in the area. Can they, this is Brendan, can they see his house there? Yes, that's one of the challenges of using that. How real is it? I'm just going to see if there's a question in the chat specifically to it. One from Robert, great material and good development of early EU projects. How do we get people to use these materials and understand them? That's a very broad question indeed. I don't know if you as a researcher have any thoughts about that.
So we expect that those star maps are going to facilitate the comprehension of those policies for common citizens that are not experts in policies and law. So we summarize it, all this information with a friendly phrasing, how I would say, and also the reports are available online on CCAT website and also UCC repository, Cora. We are going to share the links of those presentations here, the star maps presentations. What else? The animation, which thank you, Professor Devoy, you helped us a lot with this animation. And this is available on our CCAT YouTube channel. I think unfortunately we won't have time to show the presentation, the animation here today because it's around 6 minutes long, but you can watch it on our CCAT YouTube channel. And also the VR application, I have to say it's not so friendly user because we have to download or install, install the file inside the VR headset, and it's a difficult process. So we are going to share the file on our CCAT website with some instructions on how to do that. So it's available for the people who have this VR headset. But it was tested with some Fingal County Council staff to test how friendly is this VR application. And now by transforming or converting it to an augmented reality application, I believe it will be more friendly for users because you can just download it on your cell phone and go to the place and have those information. And also to facilitate the visualization, we prepared those videos so people who doesn't have a VR headset can watch the videos and see how it looks like.
Fernanda, thank you for that. I think it goes back to what the words from our president saying that, you know, knowledge is key, and one of the rules I think of this project was trying to get that information out there. And there's a few comments in the chat where Brendan has said that the information boards are very useful, and Phil Bennett has said that coastal zone impacts are often visualized just through sea level rise, and equally important for the communities to understand some of the issues such as sediment deposition and so on there. So, and Kevin Halpenny from Fingal saying there's an ongoing need for these resources which are adaptable to a range of issues and situations. So thank you very much for that. And if you have any further questions for Fernanda, please put them into the Q&A. Now we're going on to our second last speaker of the morning. It's the last tool we're going to talk about. So it's Emma McKinley of Cardiff University, a research fellow there, again talking about tools for engaging with communities of practice, and she's going to talk about the knowledge exchange that we had. So Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everybody. I will just share my screen and hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we can see that. Emma.
Thanks,
yeah.
Thanks, Pauline. I've got two screens, so unfortunately I'm going to be looking away from you while I scroll, but I will be back for questions. But one of the things that we were trying to do as part of the project was to engage with different types of communities and different types of audiences, as you've heard in this morning's talks. And obviously we had to move everything online quite early on in the project. And one of the communities of practice that we were talking about and that we wanted to ensure that we engaged with were groups that were involved in policy making, decision making, the research community. So kind of looking across that whole science policy practice interface. And when we designed the project initially, the project proposal, we had planned in, as we always do, in-person events. You've heard examples of how those had to change over the last couple of years. But the idea of those events was to bring people from different perspectives, different disciplines of research, from across industry, policy, and you know, all areas of decision making really related to climate action, climate adaptation, mitigation, particularly in a coastal context, to bring those together and to share best practice and knowledge exchange, really recognizing the different needs of the two communities and case studies that we were working with across the Irish Sea. So those needs of those partner organizations and of those two coastal spaces were quite different. And we wanted to, and we'd planned to run these in-person events that could really showcase some of those activities. So I'm going to reflect a little bit on those virtual events that we ran in 2020 and 2021 and think about maybe what that's meant in a positive way for engaging with different communities of practice and what we might want to learn from the conversations we had in those sessions and then through those events to feed into future projects, future engagement with climate change action moving forward. So I think I've probably covered the evidence of need and how we adapted, but just to kind of reiterate, this idea of these events was really to foster an active community that crossed sectors, across disciplines, and it was very of course transdisciplinary, really recognizing that we wanted to bring in a voice and meetings. Of course, we had to move these online. So when we were planning our first event, the hope was that it was going to be in Dublin, in person. We were going to have field trips. We were all going to get together. It was being hosted by Fingal County Council, and it was really being driven by this first event was really being driven by the needs in Ireland. So particularly around a lack of coastal policy in Ireland, a desire to learn from other places, to learn from what we have done rightly or wrongly, well or not, in the UK, in Wales, and to learn lessons from what's happening in different places and think about how we could maybe apply those to the Irish context. And there was also an interest in really thinking about how we could foster a network and a community of discussion and of best practice across the Irish Sea. The second event that I'll come on to speak to you about in just a little minute was really built on that first event and drew directly on feedback from the attendees at our first event in 2020 to really respond to the interests, what people wanted to know more about, and how we could further develop that knowledge exchange and learning about that best practice through these virtual events. So our first event was held in October 2020. It was termed Exchanging Knowledge and Best Practice Across Borders. And really, as I said, we were trying to respond to the needs of our Fingal County Council partners, recognising that they were very well suited and very well positioned to know where the knowledge gaps and opportunities for learning might be in an Irish context. So a lot of our thinking around the design of the programme went in, was influenced by those evidence needs, really. So we were looking at recognising that approaches to coastal management and climate adaptation will vary in different contexts. And we wanted to ensure that our speakers could bring in those different perspectives and bring in some examples of those different contexts. So with that in mind, we invited a very diverse program of speakers, and as we said, moved everything online. We ran the event across 3 days. This was fairly early in what has been probably a much more drawn out experience of virtual working than we ever thought it would be. But our planning was probably in summer of 2020. So when we were still quite new to this kind of Zoom working, Teams working that we're all very, very accomplished with now. And we decided to run the event across 3 days, taking a thematic approach so that people could dip in and out, recognizing the issues around Zoom fatigue that were coming up quite early on in the COVID work from home restrictions. And we wanted to make sure that we were making the event as accessible as possible, as convenient for people as possible, and make it so that as many people could attend as were interested. So by moving online, by running across 3 days, and by thematically grouping speakers, it meant that people could dip in and out to the sessions that were most relevant to them and that they had time to attend. So there was a bit of flexibility that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to build into the programme if we were running the event in person in Dublin, as much as we would have all loved to do that. So our speakers covered a really broad range of topics at this first event. They were very focused on policy and management approaches at a range of different scales. So we were looking at discussions around coastal or shoreline management plans from evidence here in the UK, looking at topics around flood and coastal erosion risk management, some evidence and discussion around nature-based solutions and working with nature, and really try to, draw experiences from case study based work and community scale initiatives to learn about how things are happening from the ground up as well as the top down. So our session themes took that kind of approach. So we looked at a national policy and management scale. We then, on the first day, the second day was looking at a more local authority response to climate change and coastal adaptation in different contexts. And then the third day was really looking at community projects and community engagement initiatives. And all of the event recordings are available on the CCAT website. I'll pop the links in the chat after we finish today. But we were really well attended across the 3 days. We had between 150 and 160 people attend and over 300 people register. So hopefully those people have then gone and watched the recordings. And I know that some of the audience here today were in attendance or were some of our speakers in those events. So thank you. It's an opportunity to say thank you again. But really, I guess the really fantastic thing is we got really brilliant engagement from Fingal County Council, from the Irish policy and practitioner community, really setting the scene and highlighting the importance of this kind of event to support collaboration and learning and working together to address some of the challenges that we'll be facing in response to climate change. The feedback from the event was that it was well organised and was quite a needed event at the time. I think one of the key things for me was the real value in including those case studies and that community-based work that was very, very well received by our audience. We had some fantastic speakers who tried to really talk about their initiatives and how they developed from the ground up and how they worked with different local authorities and community-based practice in different areas of the UK and in Ireland. And as I said, those presentations and talks are all available. And we really tried to draw on the feedback, the questions and answer sessions, and then I guess the feedback survey that we did afterwards to feed into the design of our second event that we ran in 2021. And by this stage, as previous members of the team have said, we had made the decision to move the whole project online. So we knew this time it was a bit different in terms of organising. We knew that CCAT 2021 was going to be an online event. And we wanted to build on the successes of CCAT 2020, looking at that thematic approach to designing the programme, also thinking about the timings, and we definitely got some really positive feedback about that kind of structure. So the second event was run in October of last year, really as the project came towards its end, really. And some of the points that had come up through the previous event, but also in the 12 months between the events, so things that have already been mentioned by some of our speakers today. So topics around climate change education, the need to ensure that we include youth voices. Of course, how climate change will affect coastal areas was still very central to the work that CCAT was doing, so that kind of maintained a central focus for the 2021 event. And engaging communities, that's always been one of our fundamental activities, as you've heard through the various tools that have been talked about so far today. So that was really one of our focus points. And so they were our 3 themes across those 3 days in October of last year. Again, thinking about policy and management, but we really had quite a different discussion and a very different set of speakers in that second event that really drew together, so 22 speakers from a range of different career stages, from different sectors. We had Climate Cymru, Climate Ireland, we had some youth speakers, we had a school exchange, but I'll mention very, very briefly later on. And some of the topics that were covered by our speakers were, again, these reflections from community initiatives and thinking about what climate change meant for them in their local area. Different best practice in terms of community engagement, and that drew on some of the messages that had come from CCAT 2020, the importance of engaging with coastal communities and stakeholders generally from a really early stage, and recognizing that it's a process, it's not a once-off sort of situation, it's something that has to continue happening and needs to be resourced and funded appropriately. Again, we talked about nature-based solutions, those case studies that drew examples, this time particularly from international case studies as well, and that was something that had been really called for following the first event. Our attendees wanted to see more about what was happening in different places across the world, so we tried to facilitate that in our second event. We did talk about climate change education, eco-anxiety and youth voices, some of the themes that I know have come up in the Q&A so far today. And then we started to showcase some of the work that you've seen this morning, some of the activities and tools that we've been developing throughout the CCAT project. So we had a total of 191 attendees coming to CCAT 2021, averaging at about 100 attendees across the three on each day. And again, the recordings are all available. And the idea of those recordings is that you can use them. They are accessible to you on our website, on our YouTube channel, and that they can be used as a bit of a legacy tool to kind of reflect on some of the key discussions and to help us feed into the future design of projects, to think about key points and key aspects of best practice in terms of community and stakeholder engagement, for example, that we can then build into how we talk about climate change and climate action in the future. Again, CCAT 2021 was very well received. And I think particularly for in this instance, it was really drawing on those different disciplines and those different voices that was very much appreciated. There was definitely a focus on climate change education. And so some of the work, obviously, that Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum have been doing to really raise that idea of climate literacy and climate citizenship is something that we really recognise in the feedback from that session. Learning about different methodologies and thinking about how we can link different themes. So climate change and culture and heritage, what we've talked about today through the Reviving Carriage Drive talk, for example. Looking at how we can create mutual benefit through taking this cross-sector or cross-topic approach to discuss climate change. So again, the event was very well received and included really brilliantly some input from a number of youth speakers. So we had some youth rangers from Pembrokeshire who contributed to the discussion. We had a youth speaker, Saoirse, and I've forgotten her surname, from Ireland, who gave a fantastic talk, a very impassioned talk about the importance of listening to youth voices in a meaningful way and ensuring that we are actively avoiding tokenism and that we recognise their role in decision making and we empower them and give them agency to be part of that decision making process. And that really came through through a lot of the conversations we had in that session. And we also had, as I said, the school exchange, which was a really great opportunity for schools in Pembrokeshire and in Fingal to talk to each other, to learn about what they were doing in different places. And they gave recorded talks as part of the session. And again, was really great to see the students engage so passionately with these topics. And hopefully that will be something that they will think about moving forward. So in terms of reflections from the event, there's two sets of this really for me. One is to reflect on the key messages from the two events and kind of pull them together. And so some of the key themes that we talked about for future climate action and thinking about how we engage with these topics for different audiences was first that there's a really urgent need to adapt to climate change. As we know, the urgency around that cannot be underestimated. And a lot of our speakers, particularly in the first CCAT 2020 event, talked about the need to stop being reactive in terms of our decision making and management, that we should be proactive. We need to be future proofing our decision making, our policies, to ensure that we are adapting in a timely fashion and that we're responding as needed. I've mentioned already that climate community engagement can be challenging. That's been talked about a number of times today. So thinking about how we can adequately and appropriately fund and support communication and effective engagement through staff resources, through the development of these different tools that we talked about through the project, was something that came up multiple times through a number of events that we've been running. The response to our inter and transdisciplinary approaches to these events, recognizing that different people will have different perspectives, have different values, different uses of their coastal spaces, and all of that needs to be taken into consideration when talking about climate change and coastal adaptation. So recognizing the value of those different voices within discussions within kind of policy design is really crucial if we are to achieve and address the challenges of climate change. There is no one size fits all solution, and everybody has a role to play in that. We heard that in President Higgins' address, that we all have a role to play in developing those solutions. So really thinking about that and ensure we bring all those voices to the table really came up as a key message throughout these events. Recognizing the coast as a national asset. As a marine social scientist, that's something that I was very happy to hear. And I think that's something that we can really push forward as we think about what does climate change mean for our coastal communities across Ireland, across the UK, and of course further afield, and how can we ensure that we are working with communities using the different tools that we've talked about today and applying those in different contexts to ensure that we are doing this in a sustainable, socially just and equitable way. So those themes of well-being, social justice, just transitions to a sustainable future for our coastal communities came up very frequently, and that need for sustained engagement. Interestingly, we talked about validating these feelings of eco-anxiety. I know that came up as a question earlier around negative emotions and concern about trying to manage negative emotions that we might kind of foster as a result of educating and raising awareness around climate change. And we did some really interesting discussions around actually recognizing that it's okay to feel that anxiety, that is a natural response to the climate crisis, and that what we need to do is help people see those solutions, help people see that they have a role, that they can take actions and move them through towards positive action. So validating that anxiety and that worry, and then providing the solutions to help people address that. And I thought that was a really interesting insight from our speakers at CCAT 2021. Thinking about issues around ownership and including diverse voices, recognizing that issues will not be the same for everybody, and that there are challenges around intersectionality and inclusivity that need to be addressed when we're talking about social justice and just transitions to address climate change, and linking to those themes that I mentioned earlier. And then crucially, this really high level topic around empowering young people and avoiding that tokenism that I mentioned earlier on. The second set of reflections are really around the moving online. And I tried to stick to the positives, although of course there were negatives around not being able to see each other in person. And we've heard a lot today about the limitations that working online can place on meaningful discussions and networking that can happen. But actually, we got some really positive responses to these online events. There was increased access as a result of the fact that the events were being held virtually. There is absolutely no way we would have had 300 people. I mean, we might have done, but it's unlikely we would have been able to have 300 people at an event in person in Dublin. So we were able to have these people register and access the resources and the talks at a later date, even if they couldn't attend on the day. As I said earlier, the structure and the programming meant people could fit it into their workplace and also try to avoid that onslaught of Zoom fatigue that we're all so familiar with. There were obviously reduced costs and limited carbon footprint with the events, which was really in line with the CCAT Eco Code, which was fantastic for us to be able to deliver. And the recordings that we've developed can be used to support virtual teaching, virtual field trips perhaps. And we also ran some events looking at virtual reality as part of teaching and learning within a university context. And some of those resources will be used, particularly, for example, at Cardiff University moving forward. So those talks can be made available. And as I said, we'll put the links in the chat shortly, so that those recordings are available to anybody who is interested, and they can be used in different ways moving forward. And then finally, that point about interactions and networking. Although we weren't in person, actually the use of the chat function, the use of the Q&A allowed for some really great facilitated discussion, even though we weren't in the same room. And I'd like to think that there were people that maybe asked questions that maybe wouldn't have done if we were in an in-person meeting. Perhaps people who were earlier in their career, community members who maybe wouldn't have attended an all-day meeting in Dublin, who were able to attend and ask these questions. So hopefully facilitated actually more of a dialogue than we maybe would have had if we'd been in an in-person meeting. So hopefully there were some real benefits from running the event in that way. So the summary of the event is being finalised at the moment and will be made available. We can send that around to you all when that's ready. There are some hopes and then so kind of some discussions happening with the Irish Sea Maritime Forum to think about how we might be able to run future events. It might be that it's a broader Irish Sea perspective rather than Ireland, Wales, but that is an opportunity, and I'd be really happy to talk to anybody else who'd be keen to think about what we might be able to do in the future. One of the pieces of feedback was we can't wait for next year's event. And I was like, we're not running an event next year, the project's finished. But maybe there are opportunities moving forward, and I think we'd be really happy to talk about that. And as I said, the recordings are all available for use and for you to look at if you weren't in attendance at those events. So Karen, that's it from me. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
Emma, thank you for your lovely, typically upbeat presentation. It was a very good note to end on. Just as you were talking, I was thinking, as I was looking at some of the Q&A, that one of the advantages of the online is, of course, it's very easy to share a link with somebody. If somebody asked me a question at a conference, I would have no way be able to find the answer but here. And that relates to a question from Neville Mackin, who was asking about, are there any examples of community-led monitoring of landscape change, particularly climate-related change? And Chiara came back and and gave them a link to CCAT's work with Natural Resources Wave and the Havens community, and I put a link through to another landscape one that I just am aware of. So listen, thank you for that. I think there may be one other question come through while I've been talking. Let me just see. Given the urgency of tackling climate change and the need to act now, how do we find the time and create these new spaces to negotiate all the different perspectives? Raising awareness of complex trade-offs and increasingly public understanding of the policy solution sounds like a very lengthy process. Has the team come to any views on how we address the need to act fast and also bring anyone along? So if any panelist has an immediate answer to that, or maybe think about it for a minute, because I think this is the time in the proceedings where I'm going to hand over to my co-PI, Philip Crowe, who's going to wrap up the various strands that have emerged during the day. We're also going to check back in with the artists. So I'll just say on behalf of the session up until now to thank the three speakers we had from the break, to thank Chiara, Fernanda and Emma for their great presentations, and hand over to Philip. And you might just remember that last question that came through there, if you can stitch it in, Philip.
Sure, great, thank you, Karen. I'm just absorbing the last question. I think it does require some thought. It's a very good
yes,
question.
I threw it at you, so sorry about that.
But I mean, when I'm on a time schedule as well, so we need to move on. And I suppose my first task is, we've heard from the project partners, but there's obviously a very important group that is missing, we haven't heard from. So I believe we were now going to go to a video that has been put together, which has a sample of people on it who were actively involved in the projects. And I should say, just before, Pauline, you started, no one was coerced in any way to contribute to this. They did it entirely of their own volition. So I think we can start that video.
CCAT has been a fantastic project that has showed me and my local authority the benefits of working together to adapt to climate change.
What has been achieved over the past 2 years is an invaluable resource and expertise that as a Cork community we can tap into.
On behalf of Karen and myself, I'd like to say how excited we are that we got to speak to you about climate education in Wales and in the UK for our Be Loud Climate podcast.
CCAT showcased a number of techniques including geodesign, which helps individuals and groups with differing and sometimes competing concerns and objectives to better understand each other.
It was really interesting for us to see how Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum is working as part of the CCAT project to support communities in understanding how they can adapt and be more resilient to the effects of climate change.
It's been great to work with the CCAT team, particularly when it comes to empowering local communities to become more resilient to climate change.
Natural Resources Wales are fortunate to work with Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum around climate engagement in Havens communities.
As the coordinator of Pembrokeshire Outdoor Schools, I was delighted to see the CCAT climate education resources by our partners, Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum.
We as a Heritage Trust have been very pleased to be partners in the CCAT mapping project for the carriage drive.
The CCAT project has really provided a brilliant example of how community engagement can be carried out using innovative digital tools, even when in-person meeting isn't possible.
Here at Gellerswick School, we were delighted to be involved in the Coastal Communities Adapting Together project. It gave the children a hands-on practical opportunity of planting trees.
We love planting the trees! Thank you very much!
Okay, thanks to everyone who contributed to that video. Just to note, there is a longer version, that was the highlights, and the longer version is on our YouTube channel. So I don't know, Pauline, maybe you could put up a link to that on the chat. I should introduce myself just quickly. So my name's Philip Crowe. I'm an assistant professor in UCD in climate responsive design, with a background in architecture, which is going to be evident later in my talk. And I suppose in many ways I'm one of the people most to blame for this project coming into existence, but I'm very happy to take that. It's been a very long road, and Karen, myself, and Louise Dunn on the UCD team were involved from the inception. I thought I'd take this opportunity at this closure event to briefly reflect at a very high level on the project, and I thought I'd divide that into 3 sections. So firstly asking, well, where did this project come from? Then asking, how did we get here? And then reflecting on, or having a look at, where do we go from here? So it's a sort of past, present, future structure. I'm not going to use story maps, and very unusually for an architect, I'm not going to use slides. I should just say actually that story maps is a tool that we've used throughout the event today. It is an ArcGIS Esri tool that we have access to it on the license that UCD has, and it's extremely useful, as you've seen, for zooming in to different images or playing videos or providing different media, etc., on one document, and then we're able to give you a link to the document rather than endless slides. And it's in keeping with the project that we would try and use different technologies. So obviously it's not available at that level without a license fee, but I understand that there is a free version that has more limited functionality that is available. So I'll just start on the first question. I know I have to keep to time, and we're doing pretty well on time so far, so I'll try not ruin that. Where did the project come from? So the premise of the project derives really from the ideas of Patrick Geddes. So Patrick Geddes was a Scottish botanist, and he's regarded as a founding father of the town planning movement. And he had a lot of ideas on how you make a transition. In his case, the transition was from the unhealthy industrial city, the very polluted industrial city of the late 1800s, the early 1900s, transitioning to a new, healthy, energy efficient, low impact, unpolluted future city, which is obviously a destination we haven't quite got to yet. I suppose the parallel then today for the CCAT project is the transition from a high to a low carbon economy and society, but also to a society that can respond and adapt to climate change. And as the most recent question, that is very urgent. And how do we do that quickly and in time? And how do we respond appropriately? And I would suggest that is an enormous question, and basically that the question put by the contributor there is, it's the subject of a future project, but then we don't have time, so the urgency is extremely important. But back to Patrick Geddes, he identified that these major societal transitions were only possible when you had the support and the involvement of everyone and a shared understanding of the challenges. So that very much, I suppose, resonates with the President, Michael D. Higgins's message that Karen read out at the start. So Geddes put huge emphasis on citizen engagement and awareness raising, which is what this project has been about in the first instance. And Geddes used 2 principal mechanisms. One was public participation events that provided access to knowledge. So in his case, he had these big, huge traveling exhibitions, and he gave all these lectures. But in the case of CCAT, we've reinterpreted that, I suppose, to online webinars, to animations, to augmented reality, virtual reality, and to that amazing timeline tool that Fernanda showed us. And then secondly, activities that co-produced knowledge. In his case, he worked with Edwardian middle-class ladies in places like Edinburgh and Dublin, to physically map urban areas and make small local scale improvements, such as gardens on vacant sites. And in CCAT, we've sort of translated that into a digital version of his mapping. So there's been a lot of participatory mapping projects that you've seen today, but also things like GeoGames, which we haven't presented to the same extent, and GeoDesign that Saul presented earlier. So in many ways, the CCAT project has been great fun because we've had this opportunity to explore Geddes' ideas in the 21st century with all these shiny new digital toys that we have. But also, like Geddes, the project, as you've seen, has worked at a very hyper-local scale. And this is in line with his mantra, which is now quite ubiquitous: think global, act local. The idea there being that by understanding the local, it's possible using systems thinking to comprehend the global and therefore make these local actions relevant. And I suppose as the impacts of climate change and associated crises become more and more evident and more in the public domain, and public awareness and concern increases, as Vicky Brown pointed out at the beginning, even since the start of this project, as she said, this mantra of think global, act local is surely more pertinent than ever. So moving on to how did we get here to this point where we're at the closure event, sadly. I suppose I could reinterpret that question as to how did we survive the past 2 years, which have been extraordinary for everyone. But I suppose the quick answer is we got here through transdisciplinary research and cross-border collaboration and additionality, which is one of the guiding principles of the Ireland-Wales programme. And Emma, you mentioned it earlier. The border in question has got a much higher profile than it had when we started the project. It's the infamous border down the Irish Sea. I could probably exaggerate my Belfast accent a little bit more for that. The partners worked very effectively in cross-border teams, literally cross-border teams, and the projects they were working on could be in either country, and you've seen that in the presentations today. And it did work remarkably well, particularly despite the fact that there have been so few opportunities to meet in person. And actually some of the team members who joined after March 2020 have actually never physically met due to COVID restrictions. So, I mean, that's partly due to the fact that video conferencing technology, even in these last 2 years, has made big leaps forward and is facilitating this type of seamless and continuous collaboration across the border. And that's really helped us to practice what we preach through our eco code, as you mentioned, Emma. So it's been really no problem to keep our travel emissions very low. But I would say that the success and productivity of this very small pilot project is principally due to the people in these cross-border teams, and in particular, the 8 full-time posts that the project created for that 2-year period. Because whenever you're starting the project, you're writing the project proposal, there's this big known unknown, which is who will work on it. And the people that have worked on this project and are still working on this project for a short period more have brought a whole lot of experience, their own skills, their own interests, and vitally huge amounts of energy along to the project and really enriched it and influenced it, as Karen mentioned earlier on. And I think that team has made it possible to adapt the project very effectively in response to what was a very unanticipated disruption of COVID. And that's had a huge impact on the project. The project altogether had an extraordinary risk register, pretty extreme. But I would say perhaps the most challenging risk was Brexit. The proposal was initiated before the Brexit vote in 2016. We were looking at this project, developing the project from about 2015. And by the time we were up and running, the first year of the operation was overshadowed very much by the threat of the UK crashing out and all the implications that would have had for funding. But I suppose it's the long-term impact of the hard Brexit that we've ended up with that is now limiting the opportunities for this type of project in the future that I want to just note here, because certainly from the UCD perspective, this is a huge loss. And I hope today we've illustrated the great value of cross-border collaboration and additionality. And we can only hope that some other opportunities will arise in the future. So talking of the future, where do we go from here? So on a very much more positive note, as Vicky, I think, noted at the beginning, when we were putting the proposal together, the last thing we wanted was a series of reports going on a shelf. We were very focused on legacy right from the first partners meeting in Wales. And it does look at this time that about 18 of the 27 activities will continue in some form independently of CCAT going forward. Some of the activities have been described to you today, a small number of them, and the legacy has been noted in the presentations. Small scale actions like these in CCAT can, according to the literature, influence the bigger picture in a number of ways, in 3 ways principally. One is by repetition and aggregation of small initiatives. So Chiara mentioned there's a couple of projects that are using the templates for the participatory mapping in different places. I'm working on the one that Chiara mentioned in County Mayo. There's the other way to for small scale actions to influence the bigger picture is to grow in scale, so just become a larger thing. But the third one, which I want to just touch on, is translating ideas into mainstream settings. And in that category, I think we do have some potential examples, and none of them are particularly confirmed apart from one actually. So I'll just give you some of the examples. So Antashka, which is the National Trust for Ireland, not quite equivalent to the UK National Trust, is very interested in integrating a number of the tools, including the climate cards game and the carbon calculator, into their nationwide Green Schools programme. Another example would be Fingal County Council is planning to adopt and continue to use geodesign on large-scale planning projects because they find it so useful, as Saul described. And as Emma mentioned, the Irish Sea Maritime Forum are interested in continuing those knowledge and best practice across borders events into the future. The most concrete example of translating into a more mainstream setting is the Earth Institute Citizens Observatory that Chiara mentioned, where the technology and the templates developed in CCAT will be available for use across the university. And I suppose just watching the chat today, we would be very interested to hear from other organisations who might be interested in taking some of these tools forward. We are a pilot project. Our job was to explore these tools, to develop them to a certain point, and what we would love is for them to sort of go out into the world and be taken up by other organisations. So I suppose that was a very long-winded way of saying 3 things. That CCAT has brought some old ideas on citizen engagement into the 21st century, and that it's been quite good fun doing that. Secondly, that this type of cross-border collaboration has a really important role to play. So, I mean, one answer to the question, how do we move at sufficient speed, how do we address these challenges? We need to work together. We need collaboration, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge to address these complex challenges that we are facing. And the third point is that this small 2-year pilot project with 6 partners has avoided the fate of the report on the shelf and will have a tangible legacy going forward. So I think I might ask if we could have a look to see how Caroline's getting on with her amazing graphic. Is that possible, Pauline? Wow, it's all filled in. So, and Caroline, that looks incredible. I can't read it on my small screen, but I'm sure that's going to be available, obviously, on the CCAT website after the event.
Yeah, we'll put it up onto the website and share Perfect. It with everyone. Yeah.
But well done, Caroline. Caroline, I have no idea how you do that. And I struggle to keep up with notes and scribbling on a page, but you've managed to do it in pictures. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. So before we close and finally wrap up, on behalf of myself and Karen as the co-PIs on the project, there are obviously a lot of thank yous. I'm not going to labour these, but first thank you is to everyone in the audience for your attendance and attention for this morning and this afternoon. Big thank you to the people and organisations who have supported and participated in and collaborated on the project. And that graphic that Karen showed at the beginning certainly shows the breadth of the collaboration and how the reach of the project. And that includes obviously communities in both Fingal and Pembrokeshire. I'd like to say a big thank you to the partner organisations for taking the leap of faith and getting involved in this project. So that's the Port of Milford Haven, Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum, Cardiff University, Fingal County Council, University College Cork and UCD. And also a long list of interns and students who have been mentioned throughout, but not all of them, who inputted into the project and helped to boost it and amplify it, certainly. And a massive thank you to the hardworking full-time employees from the 6 partners and to the advisory board. So Vicky Brown, who spoke with us today, thank you, Vicky, it's really appreciated. Your colleagues Tig McIntyre, Stuart Capstick and Peter Davis as well. And obviously a big thank you to the funders, which is the Ireland-Wales Cooperation Programme, operated by WEFO, the Welsh European Finance Office, and in Ireland by the Southern Regional Assembly. And a big thank you to our wonderful project development officer, who I hope is online today, Breda Curran, who has been a fantastic support and helped guide us through this process. A special thank you to Pauline, who has been backstage on this event, but it's occasionally you've heard her, for organising the event, and the team for putting this all together. And a big thank you also to Pauline and Louise Dunn. It's Pauline Power and Louise Dunn for keeping the whole project on the straight and narrow in terms of project and financial management. So as has been said already, there will be an email sent out to everybody who's attended today with a link to the recordings and a link to the story maps. And the story maps have endless links in them, and you will be able to delve into all of the projects. Further information and contact details are on our website, and the website will not disappear suddenly. It's going to be up there until, I understand, 2026. It won't be quite as busy from after February, but it will still be there. Okay, so Karen, is there any other thing that I've forgotten just before I sign off?
I don't think so, Philip. I think that's
got
really
everything?
it. You've
I've
got
lots
everything.
of notes. Pauline, you probably have something that I've forgotten, have you?
No, I don't. Well
okay,
done.
excellent. Okay.
So, I mean, I think just to answer maybe the one consistent question, where do people find the information? Embedded in the email that everybody will get are the links to the tools, or where they can find more information about them, and our contact details. Is that right? So I think it's the message to look into your emails. There should be an email from you from CCAT that gives you the links to the story maps that Philip talked about.
I suppose a point to make about the tools is that they are and I think, Lauren, you mentioned it, a lot of them are proprietary tools that are available and some of them are open source, but a lot of them are proprietary tools that you require license for, but there are free versions for some of them. And in many cases in CCAT, we have used those tools in new situations, or we've combined them with one another. So we've developed them to a certain point, but if people are interested in taking them further, we are more than happy to give you every bit of information you need as to how that can be done, so that they can be adopted by other organizations. But obviously our resources and our funding is unfortunately ending this month. But please get in touch if you're interested in moving any of them forward. And also what's happening is all the partners are using them further. So Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum obviously is taking forward the card games and any of the other tools that were part of the project. The other thing to say about all of these tools is that they all develop themselves. So keeping up to date with the software is actually really tricky if you're developing it yourself. So the advantage of using proprietary tools like the GeoDesign Hub or Esri ArcGIS is that they update them, and you have much less stress involved in terms of the digital aspect of running those tools. Okay, so it's 12:32 according to my computer. So thank you very much for joining us. The whole point of this project is to communicate to everyone the work that we've done, and you've made that possible by attending today. So we do really appreciate it. and have a good Wednesday, and please stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.